Homer Simpson has been in his late 30s for over 35 years of real time, which means he's now somehow younger than he was when the show started, and the writers have never once acknowledged this in the main canon. I'm covering over 36 distinct eras and generations of the Simpson family, stretching from literal prehistory all the way to the present day floating timeline, focusing on the primary family and their direct ancestors. I'm excluding spin-offs, parodies, and Treehouse of Horror segments, because if I tried to reconcile every single Halloween special where the family gets turned into various monsters or dies horribly, we'd be here until the heat death of the universe. You might think The Simpsons started with Homer and Marge meeting in high school, but the family's lineage actually stretches back to the dawn of human civilization. With caveman Simpsons, biblical Simpsons, medieval Simpsons, and pretty much every other historical period you can imagine, all of them somehow leading to a safety inspector who works at a nuclear power plant in Springfield. So we start with the very beginning. Okay, so in the sprawling, frankly baffling tapestry of the Simpsons universe, there's this one episode where Homer, I kid you not, time travels back to the Big Bang. Like he sees it, and then accidentally creates the universe as we know it by sneezing. This is canon. This is a thing that happened. And it's not even the weirdest time travel incident. We'll get to the time donut, don't you worry. But before we get to any of that, before there were even sentient donuts, before there was Springfield, before there was electricity, before there was, well, anything resembling modern civilization, there was prehistory. We're talking so far back that the very concept of a timeline is pretty much just a series of grunts and cave paintings. But even then, the foundational elements of the Simpson family, their core archetypes, were already firmly in place. It's wild. We're in the ancient past, like millions of years ago, when the world was still figuring itself out. And right there, fumbling through the primordial ooze and dodging dinosaurs, we find Homerus. Yes, Homerus, because of course he's called Homerus. What else would he be called? It's not like the writers were going to get creative with the names of the ancestors. That would be too much effort. Homerus is, predictably, a bit of a dim bulb, even by prehistoric standards. He's got this knack for stumbling into monumental discoveries, almost entirely by accident, and then immediately forgetting how he did it, or failing to capitalize on the implications. Take fire, for example. Homerus, bless his simple heart, is credited with discovering fire. Not inventing it, mind you, because fire already existed, but discovering how to control it. You'd think this would be a game changer, right? Warmth, cooked food, warding off predators, all good things. But Homerus struggles. He can't quite grasp the concept of, say, maintaining a fire. He'll get it going, maybe cook a mammoth steak. We'll get to the mammoths, trust me. And then just let it fizzle out, because he's distracted by a shiny rock or something. It's a miracle humanity survived, honestly. And the wheel? Oh, the wheel. Another one of Homerus's accidental masterpieces. He invents the wheel, this revolutionary concept of circular motion for transport, and then proceeds to use it for absolutely everything but transport. He tries to eat it, wears it as a hat, rolls it down a hill for fun. It's like he's got all the pieces of a puzzle, but can't quite figure out what the picture is supposed to be. His tools are, to put it mildly, rudimentary. He's got a club, sometimes a very large rock, and that's about it. He's constantly trying to hammer things with the wrong end of his club, or he'll try to use a rock that's clearly too heavy for him, dropping it on his foot with predictable frequency. It's a recurring gag, this inability to master even the most basic implements, and it's a direct lineage to our modern Homer's struggles with, well, anything more complex than a remote control. And sometimes even the remote control. His home, naturally, is a cave. Not a particularly nice cave, either. It's drafty, probably smells like damp earth and whatever prehistoric creature wandered in last week. and is generally just a step up from sleeping under a bush. It's often depicted with crude drawings on the walls, bits of bone scattered around, and a general air of disarray. It's the prehistoric equivalent of a messy garage, except it's where he lives. And this is where Margarine comes in. Margarine. Yes, Margarine, because Marge. Again, not exactly stretching the creative muscles there, but it gets the point across. Margarine is the long-suffering, surprisingly patient ancestor of Marge Simpson, and her primary goal in life seems to be civilizing Homerus. It's a thankless task, frankly. She's constantly trying to instill some semblance of order, some basic understanding of cause and effect, some notion of personal hygiene. Good luck with that one in a cave. She's the one trying to teach him basic communication. While Homerus communicates primarily through grunts, pointing, and occasionally hitting things with his club, Margarine is attempting to introduce concepts like food, danger, and don't eat that. It's a slow process, incredibly slow, like geological time slow. She tries to teach him social norms too, things like don't scratch yourself there in public, or maybe don't try to fight the saber-toothed tiger with a twig. These are not complex concepts, but for Homerus, they might as well be quantum physics. She's the one trying to make him understand that, no, you can't just take whatever you want from the neighbouring cave person. There are rules, unspoken, unwritten rules, but rules nonetheless. And Homerus naturally breaks them all, usually with a cheerful, oblivious grin. It's amazing she didn't just give up and go live with a more evolved hominid. But then, it wouldn't be the Simpsons, would it? Life in prehistoric times is, as you might imagine, fraught with peril. The family faces constant challenges from the local fauna. Saber-toothed tigers are a particular nuisance, always lurking just outside the cave, their massive fangs glinting in the moonlight. Homerus, in his infinite wisdom, often tries to scare them off by shouting loudly or, again, hitting them with a stick. This rarely works out well for Homerus. He usually ends up running back into the cave, screaming for Margarine to save him, or more often, just curling up in a ball and hoping the tiger loses interest. And then there are the mammoths. Oh, the mammoths. These woolly giants are a constant presence in the prehistoric landscape. Homerus frequently encounters them, usually while he's out foraging for berries or, more likely, just wandering aimlessly. Sometimes he tries to hunt them. This is, of course, an absurd endeavour. Homerus, armed with his club and his questionable intellect, attempting to take down a creature the size of a small house. It's always depicted as a comical failure, with Homerus either being chased up a tree, flattened by a mammoth foot, or simply giving up after a single, half-hearted swing of his club. He's more likely to accidentally trip a mammoth than to actually hunt one, and yet he persists. The allure of a giant, furry, slow-moving target is just too much for his primitive brain to resist. Now let's talk about the kids, because even in prehistory, there are kids, and they are predictably exactly like their modern counterparts. Bartus, the ancestor of Bart, is a mischievous cave child. He's always causing trouble, playing pranks on Homerus, drawing crude, rude pictures on the cave walls, which Margarine then has to scrub off with a rock, and generally being a menace to prehistoric society. He's got that same rebellious streak, that same insatiable desire to push boundaries and annoy everyone around him. He probably invented the concept of the slingshot, using a vine and a smooth river stone to pelt unsuspecting creatures and Homerus from a distance. He's the reason the saber-toothed tigers are always so grumpy. Lisa, the ancestor of Lisa, is naturally the intelligent one. Even as a cave child, she shows early signs of intelligence and artistic talent. While Bartus is drawing stick figures fighting each other, Lisa is creating surprisingly intricate cave paintings, depicting the movements of the stars, or at least her interpretation of them, the different types of flora and fauna, and even occasionally a surprisingly accurate portrait of her family. She's the one who probably figured out how to make fire stay lit, or how to fashion a slightly more effective tool than a blunt rock. She's observant, thoughtful, and probably already questioning the societal norms of her cave-dwelling peers. She's the one who's going to invent agriculture, probably, but Homerus will accidentally eat all the seeds. And then there's Maggie. Or rather, Maggie's ancestor, also named Maggie. Because, of course, she's a silent but observant infant, just like her modern counterpart. She's often depicted in a primitive high chair, usually made of woven vines or a hollowed-out log, quietly sucking on a bone or a smooth pebble, taking everything in. She's the one who sees all the absurdities, all the blunders, all the moments of genuine prehistoric stupidity, and just processes it with wide, unblinking eyes. She's probably the smartest of the bunch, even as an infant. She's probably the one who secretly figures out how to domesticate a wolf, or how to invent a truly effective hunting spear, but then just keeps it to herself because, honestly, what's the point? No one else would understand. She's just silently judging everyone, probably already planning her escape from this primitive existence. And that, my friends, is just the beginning of the prehistoric era. We haven't even gotten to the first time someone tried to invent beer. That's a story for another time. So Homerus and Margarine are stuck in this cave. They've got Bartus running around, and at some point they stumble into the next big evolutionary leap, which is agriculture. Or at least they try to. The episode shows them attempting to plant seeds, and I want to be clear here, they are genuinely terrible at it. Homerus looks at a handful of seeds, looks at the ground, and just kind of tosses them randomly while making grunting noises. Margarine tries to organise the process by arranging seeds in neat little rows, but then a pterodactyl, because sure, why not, swoops down and eats half of them. The show plays fast and loose with which dinosaurs existed when, and honestly, at this point, I've given up trying to map Simpsons paleontology to actual science. Anyway, Homerus gets frustrated with the whole farming thing and decides the seeds are cursed, so he tries to bury them as far away from the cave as possible, which, and I cannot stress this enough, is literally just planting them somewhere else. A few scenes later, there's a tree growing in that exact spot, and Homerus acts like it's a miracle from the gods. He has no idea he caused it. Zero concept of cause and effect with this guy. Then, and this is where it gets weirdly prescient, Homerus invents television. Primitive television, but still. He's sitting in the cave one evening, the sun is setting, and he notices his shadow on the cave wall doing a little dance as he moves. You can see the exact moment the idea hits him, which the animators show by having a small rock fall on his head, because subtlety is not in the Simpsons' vocabulary. He starts making hand puppets, just shadow puppets on the wall, doing little scenes, and Bartus and Lisa are transfixed. They sit there staring at the wall while Homerus does this crude puppet show about a caveman hitting another caveman with a club. It's the first sitcom. Margarine is not impressed. She's trying to prepare dinner, which appears to be some kind of roasted lizard, and everyone is ignoring the food because they are watching the wall. Homerus gets so into his shadow puppet routine that he starts doing it every single night, and Margarine has this look of profound exhaustion, like she can see the next 10,000 years of her descendants staring at screens and ignoring their families. The show is making a point here, obviously, but it's doing it through a caveman wiggling his fingers at a rock wall, which is the Simpsons in a nutshell. The family starts encountering other cave families around this time, and this is where the social structure of prehistoric Springfield starts to take shape. There's Barnus, who is clearly Barney, and Moerus, who runs a watering hole, which is literally just a hole in the ground with water in it. The other cavemen gather there to drink and grunt at each other. Homerus becomes a regular, obviously. He and Barney sit by the waterhole making caveman small talk, which consists of pointing at things and laughing. Moerus gets annoyed because they're scaring away the mammoths who also drink there, and there's this whole conflict about whether the watering hole is for cavemen or animals. It escalates, as things do, and Homerus ends up in a rock-throwing fight with another caveman named Nedrus, who is exactly as pious and friendly as you'd expect. Nedrus keeps trying to turn the other cheek, but in caveman terms that just means he keeps getting hit with rocks. The show plays it for laughs, but there's also this undercurrent of genuine social evolution happening. These families are figuring out property rights and shared resources in real time, and they're doing it badly. Homerus decides he wants pets. Domestication is the next frontier, and he approaches it with his characteristic intelligence, which is to say none. He tries to domesticate a saber-toothed tiger first, just walks up to it and tries to pet it. The tiger does exactly what you'd expect and chases him back to the cave, and now there's a tiger trying to get into their home. Margarine is furious. She's holding baby Lisa and yelling at Homerus in grunts and gestures, and Homerus is trying to explain that he thought the tiger would be friendly because it has big eyes. The logic is airtight. The tiger eventually leaves, but Homerus doesn't learn his lesson. Next, he tries to bring home a woolly mammoth. He lures it with food, gets it close to the cave, and then realizes he has no plan for what to do with a mammoth. It's too big to fit in the cave. It eats all their stored food in about 30 seconds. Margarine just stares at him. The mammoth wanders off, and Homerus tries one more time with something smaller, which turns out to be a prehistoric version of Santa's little helper, some kind of proto-dog. This one actually works. The dog stays, it's loyal, it helps with hunting, and Homerus acts like he planned the whole thing. He's taking full credit for inventing dog domestication. Margarine, meanwhile, is trying to impose order on this chaos. She's the only one thinking long-term, which is a running theme that will persist for the next several thousand years. She establishes mealtimes by tracking the sun's position. She creates a sleeping area separate from the living area by piling up rocks as a divider. She even tries to implement a chore system, assigning tasks to Bartus and Lisa, though Bartus ignores her completely. Margarine makes a chart on the cave wall using charcoal, little pictograms showing who should do what, and it's genuinely sophisticated for the time period. Homerus looks at the chart, nods like he understands, and then immediately goes to take a nap. There's a scene where Margarine is organising their possessions, which amounts to about 6 rocks and a stick, and she's treating it with the same seriousness that a modern person would treat a full house. She's building civilization from nothing, and no one is helping. Bartus is a menace. He plays pranks on Homerus constantly, and they're escalating in complexity. First, it's simple stuff like hiding Homerus's favourite rock, the one he uses to crack nuts. Then Bartus starts setting up traps, primitive tripwires made of vines that send Homerus tumbling into mud pits. There's a whole sequence of Homerus chasing Bartus around the prehistoric landscape, both of them running past dinosaurs and tar pits, and it's the exact same dynamic that will play out in every era. Homerus is always just slightly too slow to catch him. At one point, Bartus paints a fake cave entrance on a rock wall, and Homerus runs directly into it, Wile E. Coyote style. The show is anachronistic about which cartoon physics apply when, but I've stopped questioning it. Lisa, even as a cave toddler, is the smart one. She tries to warn the family about dangers using gestures and drawings on the cave wall. She draws a picture of a volcano erupting, and Homerus looks at it and thinks it's a pretty flower. She's pointing frantically at the actual volcano in the distance, which is smoking, and Homerus pats her on the head and goes back to his shadow puppets. This happens multiple times. Lisa predicts a stampede by noticing animal behaviour patterns, and no one listens. She figures out that certain plants are poisonous by watching which ones the animals avoid, and Homerus eats one anyway because he likes the colour. Margarine is the only one who pays attention to Lisa's warnings, but even she can't always convince Homerus to take action. There's a tragic element to it, watching this child have knowledge that could save her family and being completely ignored. The natural disasters come, because of course they do. The volcano that Lisa warned about erupts, and the family has to evacuate the cave in a panic. They're running through ash and lava flows, carrying whatever they can grab, and Homerus stops to take his shadow puppet setup. His priorities are insane. They find a new cave further away, and the whole process of establishing order starts over. Margarine looks exhausted. There's also an earthquake that destroys Moerus's watering hole, and a flood that wipes out several cave families' homes. The show doesn't dwell on the tragedy, but you see the background characters, the other cavemen, dealing with loss and having to rebuild. It's darker than you'd expect from a Simpsons parody segment. Eventually, Homerus and Margarine have more children. The family expands, and you see baby versions of Maggie and potentially other Simpson relatives, though the show is vague about exactly how many kids they have in this era. The cave gets more crowded. Margarine is managing multiple children now, all while trying to maintain her organisational systems, and Homerus is less help than ever. He's discovered fermented fruit at this point, so add prehistoric alcoholism to the list of problems. The family unit is growing, becoming more complex, and you can see the template forming for every future generation. Same dynamics, same conflicts, same basic structure, just with different technology levels. The writers are making it clear that the Simpsons family dysfunction is eternal, encoded in their DNA from the very beginning, and honestly, that's kind of brilliant, in a depressing way. So the very first thing we need to wrap our heads around, before we even get to, a single yellow person, is that the universe itself, the entire cosmos that the Simpsons inhabit, was created by an unseen force. We don't get a name, we don't get a face, just this vague, omnipotent entity that apparently just decided, you know what? Let there be light. And also, eventually, donuts. It's a pretty standard creation myth, honestly, but it's important because it sets the stage for everything that follows. It's not like the Simpsons just popped into existence. There was a whole cosmic ballet leading up to it, a grand universal overture before the first "do" was ever uttered. And this primordial soup of nothingness becoming everything, this is where we begin our journey, way, way back in the biblical and ancient times, long before even the concept of a couch gag existed. From that initial cosmic spark, we fast forward, a gazillion years, give or take a few millennia, to the point where life finally decides to get interesting. And by interesting, I mean a single-celled organism, a microscopic blob of protoplasm, sloshing around in the ancient oceans. Now here's the kicker. This humble, utterly unremarkable little critter is a distant ancestor of the Simpsons. Yes, you heard that right. Before Homer was Homer, before Marge was Marge, there was just this one-celled dude, probably just trying to photosynthesize or whatever single-celled organisms do. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That the entire lineage, the very essence of Simpsonness, can be traced back to something you'd need a super-powered electron microscope to even see. I'm genuinely curious what genetic trait, what tiny proto-yellow pigment was passed down through the eons from this microscopic ancestor. Was it an affinity for simple carbohydrates? A predisposition for mild to moderate clumsiness? The writers, bless their hearts, don't elaborate, which is both frustrating and, frankly, hilarious. It's like they just threw that in there to make us all go, wait, what? Anyway, moving on from our single-celled progenitor, because honestly, there's only so much you can say about a blob, we eventually arrive at the dawn of humanity, or at least the dawn of hominids. And surprise, surprise, a Simpson ancestor is right there in the thick of it. We see them, these early proto-Simpsons, discovering fire, not just like stumbling upon a lightning strike, but actively harnessing it. Imagine the scene. A bunch of furry, grunting ancestors, probably with slightly receding hairlines even back then, huddled around a flickering flame, marvelling at its warmth and its ability to cook a suspiciously pig-like animal. And then, not content with just fire, they start using tools. Simple tools, mind you, probably just rocks and sticks. But it's a monumental leap. This is where we see the first glimmer of that innate Simpson ingenuity, that ability to, shall we say, improvise with whatever's at hand, even if the improvisation usually ends in minor catastrophe. It's not clear if this particular ancestor invented the wheel, but I wouldn't put it past them to have at least tried to roll a square rock and then blamed it on someone else. So, we've got fire, we've got tools, and then, because the Simpsons timeline is nothing if not ambitious, we jump straight to the story of Noah's Ark. And naturally, a Simpson ancestor is there, front and centre, struggling to get 2 of every animal on board. I mean, can you even imagine a Simpson trying to organise a zoo-sized menagerie onto a wooden boat, probably built with questionable structural integrity? You just know there were arguments, probably involving a dispute over whether a platypus counted as a mammal and a bird, or if 2 snails were truly every snail. I picture this ancestor, probably named something like Ugg Simpson, frantically trying to shove a pair of grumpy rhinos up a ramp while simultaneously trying to explain to a pair of skeptical giraffes that, yes, their necks will fit. The sheer unadulterated chaos of that situation, filtered through the lens of a Simpson, is just a comedic goldmine. And the fact that they succeeded, that they managed to get all those animals on board and survive the flood, is a testament to either incredible luck or a truly astonishing level of stubbornness, which, let's be honest, runs deep in the Simpson gene pool. From the soggy aftermath of the flood, we then transition to the construction of the Tower of Babel. And of course, the Simpson ancestor is present, possibly as a shepherd, which, given their later penchant for low-skill, high-reward jobs, feels entirely on brand. This ancestor, let's call him Shempson, is just minding his own business, probably counting sheep or trying to figure out how to invent a really comfortable rock, when suddenly this massive, ambitious tower starts going up. And then, poof, everyone's speaking different languages. I can only imagine Shempson's exasperation. He was probably just trying to ask for directions to the nearest watering hole, and suddenly everyone's speaking in tongues. It's a classic Simpson predicament. Minding your own business, and then the world just decides to get incredibly complicated around you. You just know he tried to order a beer and ended up with a brick. The writers really lean into this idea of the Simpsons being present for, and mildly inconvenienced by, every major historical event. It's a running gag that works, because it's so utterly absurd. Next up, we're in ancient Egypt, and guess what? A Simpson ancestor is an Egyptian pharaoh. Yes, a pharaoh, I know. From single-celled organism to shepherd to ruler of Egypt. The upward mobility of this family is truly something to behold, even if it's completely nonsensical. This pharaoh, let's call him Pharaoh Simpsons II, is commissioning a pyramid. Now this is where it gets interesting. Is he a benevolent ruler, overseeing a grand architectural marvel? Or is he, as I suspect, just trying to build the biggest, most ostentatious tomb possible? Probably because he lost a bet with a rival pharaoh, or just really liked the idea of having a giant pointy hat made of stone. I picture him in his elaborate pharaonic headwear, probably with a tiny gold-plated donut on top, yelling at his slaves, who are almost certainly also Simpson ancestors, because why not, to speed it up, I've got a pyramid scheme to run. The sheer audacity of this family to not only be present for these events, but to be leading them is just fantastic. And you just know that Pyramid has a secret passage leading to a hidden chamber filled with ancient, stale lard-lad donuts. And then, because history is nothing if not a series of overlapping narratives, we have Moses parting the Red Sea, And who's a contemporary of Moses? You guessed it, a Simpson ancestor. Now this is where the timeline gets a little fuzzy for me, because if a Simpson ancestor was a pharaoh, and Moses was, fighting a pharaoh, then are we talking about two different Simpson ancestors? Or did the pharaoh ancestor have a sudden change of heart and decide to follow Moses? Or maybe he was just like a really confused bystander, caught between a rock and a hard place. Or in this case, a pharaoh and a miraculously parted sea. I envision this ancestor, let's call him Moerus Simpson, standing on the shore, probably with a bewildered expression, clutching a small petrified fish, just trying to figure out which way to go. Wait, so we're walking through the water now? Is this safe? Are there, sharks in here? The unscripted nature of these historical cameos is what makes them so endearing. It's not about the Simpsons being the central figures, it's about them being there, observing, reacting, and probably making a slightly inappropriate comment. And just when you think you've seen it all, we zip over to ancient China. Because why not? And wouldn't you know it, a Simpson ancestor is present during the construction of the Great Wall of China. I mean, of course they are. This family has a passport that would make Indiana Jones jealous. I picture this ancestor, perhaps named Chung-Lee Simpson, not necessarily building the wall, but probably supervising the lunch breaks, or maybe trying to invent a more efficient way to carry bricks that involves a catapult and a lot of screaming. Or perhaps they were just a tourist, marvelling at the sheer scale of the project, probably complaining about the lack of decent dim sum in the area. The image of a slightly portly, yellow-skinned ancestor, wearing a conical hat and a look of mild bewilderment, observing the construction of one of the world's most iconic landmarks, is just chef's kiss. It's the perfect blend of historical grandeur and mundane Simpson-esque observation. Finally, for this particular segment of ancient history, we land in ancient Greece. And you guessed it, a Greek philosopher, potentially a Simpson ancestor, is debating in the Agora. Now this is where it gets really interesting. A philosopher, a Simpson, engaging in deep intellectual discourse. I mean, I love the Simpsons, but intellectual discourse isn't exactly their strong suit. I imagine this ancestor, let's call him Socrates Simpson, probably debating the merits of, a really good olive versus a slightly less good olive, or trying to prove, through convoluted logic, that the square root of a donut is in fact a bigger donut. He's probably surrounded by other, more serious philosophers, all looking at him with a mixture of confusion and mild amusement. And thus, my esteemed colleagues, Socrates Simpson would declare, gesturing dramatically with a half-eaten gyro, the inherent truth of the universe can only be found in the pursuit of maximum comfort and minimal effort. And then he'd probably trip over his toga. It's this kind of deadpan absurdity, this willingness to insert a Simpson into any historical context, no matter how incongruous, that makes this timeline so utterly brilliant. It's like the writers are constantly daring us to say, okay, that's too much, and then they just keep going. And we, the loyal viewers, just keep eating it up. Because honestly, what else are we going to do? So anyway, at some point, a Simpson ancestor ends up fighting at Thermopylae, which is the battle where 300 Spartans held off the entire Persian army in a narrow mountain pass. This ancestor, who looks exactly like Homer, but with a Spartan helmet and significantly better muscle definition, is part of that legendary stand. The show depicts him fighting alongside the other Spartans, and I want to be clear about something here. He's not one of the 300 elite warriors. He's just sort of there. The episode shows him getting distracted during the battle, wandering off to look at something, maybe food, definitely food, and then accidentally stumbling back into formation, just in time to look heroic. The Persians eventually win by finding a mountain path around the pass, which historically happened because a Greek traitor named Ephialtes showed them the way, But the Simpson ancestor's contribution to the defence is, let's say, mixed. He survives longer than he probably should have given his tactical awareness, which is none. Then we jump forward to Rome itself, where another ancestor is apparently an emperor. The show has depicted multiple Simpson ancestors as Roman emperors across different episodes, which creates a bit of a continuity snarl, because Rome had a lot of emperors, but not that many, and also they didn't all look identical and have the same two first names rotating through the family. This particular emperor ancestor deals with gladiator games, which were the main form of public entertainment in Rome, and also a way to execute criminals and prisoners of war while calling it sport. The ancestor is shown in the imperial box at the Colosseum, giving thumbs up or thumbs down to determine whether a gladiator lives or dies. He's eating something, always eating, and he seems more interested in the snacks than the actual life or death combat happening in front of him. The political intrigue part comes in because being a Roman emperor was one of the most dangerous jobs in human history. The life expectancy for emperors was terrible. You had the Senate plotting against you, the Praetorian Guard who were supposed to protect you but kept assassinating emperors and auctioning off the throne, and your own family members trying to poison you at dinner. This ancestor somehow navigates all of that, probably by accident, possibly by being too dense to realise he's in danger. At some point, another Simpson ancestor is present at Pompeii when Mount Vesuvius erupts in 79 AD. This is one of the most famous natural disasters in history. Vesuvius buried the entire city in volcanic ash and pumice, preserving it like a time capsule, which is how we know so much about daily Roman life. The ancestor is shown as a spectator, just a regular citizen of Pompeii, going about his day when the mountain explodes. The show depicts him ignoring the initial warning signs, the small earthquakes, the strange smell, the animals fleeing, all the things that, in retrospect, were obviously signs of an imminent eruption. He's in the Forum, or maybe at a Thermopolium, which was a Roman fast food restaurant, because of course he is. When the eruption actually starts, he reacts slowly, very slowly, and the implication is that he probably doesn't make it out. The ash and pumice fall at a rate that buries the city in hours, and this ancestor's last moments are spent confused about why the sky is raining rocks. The show plays this for laughs, but it's also genuinely dark when you think about it, which is a very Simpsons move. Now we need to talk about Jesus Christ, who was born in Bethlehem during this general time period. The show has referenced Jesus multiple times, and he exists in the Simpsons universe as a historical and religious figure. He's been shown in nativity scenes, mentioned in church services, and Reverend Lovejoy talks about him constantly. The birth of Jesus happens during the reign of Caesar Augustus, which overlaps with when the Simpson ancestors are running around the Roman Empire. There's no episode where a Simpson ancestor directly witnesses the nativity, but given that the family has ancestors everywhere else in history, it would be statistically weird if none of them were in Bethlehem that night. The show treats Christianity as one of several religions that exist in their universe, and Jesus is a real figure who lived and died, and depending on which character is talking, may or may not have performed miracles. Another ancestor serves as a centurion in the Roman army during the time of Christ. A centurion commanded 80 men, not 100 despite the name, because Roman military organisation was weird like that. This ancestor wears the distinctive centurion helmet with the transverse crest and carries a vine staff, which centurions use to discipline their soldiers. He's stationed somewhere in Judea, which was a Roman province and a constant source of headaches for the empire because of ongoing rebellions and religious tensions. The show depicts this centurion ancestor as confused by the local religious disputes, unable to pronounce Hebrew or Aramaic names correctly, and mostly concerned with when his next meal is coming. He's probably present at events described in the New Testament, maybe at the crucifixion itself, since centurions oversaw executions, but the show doesn't explicitly depict that. What it does show is him being a fairly typical Roman soldier, more interested in his pay and his wine ration than the spiritual significance of what's happening around him. Then another ancestor is present during the burning of Rome, which happened in 64 AD during the reign of Emperor Nero. The Great Fire of Rome burned for 6 days and destroyed huge sections of the city. The famous legend, which is probably not true but makes for good television, is that Nero fiddled while Rome burned. He actually played the lyre, not the fiddle, and he probably wasn't even in Rome when the fire started, but the image stuck. The Simpson ancestor is shown watching the fire, and there's a question of whether he's just witnessing it or somehow involved in starting it. The show implies he might have accidentally caused it, maybe by knocking over an oil lamp or leaving something cooking unattended, which would be very on brand for this family. Nero blamed the Christians for the fire and used it as an excuse to persecute them, and he also used the cleared land to build his enormous Golden House palace. So the fire had major historical consequences, regardless of who actually started it. At some point, a Viking ancestor set sail to explore new lands. The Vikings were seafaring Norse warriors and traders who raided and settled across Europe, and they reached North America centuries before Columbus. This ancestor is shown on a longship, which were the fast, shallow draft vessels the Vikings used for both war and exploration. He's got the helmet, probably without horns because Vikings didn't actually wear horned helmets. That was a later invention by opera designers, but the show gives him horns anyway because it looks cool. He's sailing west, possibly toward Vinland, which is what the Vikings called the part of North America they briefly colonized around the year 1000. The ancestor is depicted as brave, but also kind of seasick, which is a problem when you're spending weeks crossing the North Atlantic in an open boat. The Vikings navigated using the sun, stars, and possibly sunstones, which were crystals that could locate the sun, even through clouds, and they were genuinely incredible sailors. Another ancestor becomes a scribe in a monastery during the early Dark Ages. After the Western Roman Empire falls, monasteries become the main preservers of literacy and learning in Europe. Monks spend their days copying manuscripts by hand, which is how ancient texts survived into the modern era. This Simpson ancestor is shown in a scriptorium, the room where monks did their copying work, hunched over a manuscript with a quill pen. Medieval scribes sometimes left notes in the margins of the books they were copying, complaining about the cold, about their hand cramps, about how bored they were, and this ancestor definitely seems like the type to doodle in the margins when he should be working. The work was painstaking and took years to complete a single book, and the ancestor is depicted as not particularly good at it. His lettering uneven, his illuminations kind of sloppy. The fall of the Western Roman Empire happens in 476 AD, when the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, is deposed by a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer. A Simpson ancestor witnesses this, the final collapse of an empire that had lasted for centuries. He's in Rome, or maybe Ravenna, which was the capital by that point, watching as the imperial regalia is sent to Constantinople, and the western half of the empire just stops existing as a political entity. The ancestor probably doesn't fully understand what he's watching, doesn't grasp that this is a hinge point in history, the moment historians use to mark the end of classical antiquity and the beginning of the Middle Ages. He's just confused about why suddenly there's no emperor anymore, and who's in charge now, and whether he still has to pay his taxes. So we jump forward several centuries into medieval England, and the first Simpson we can actually name with any specificity shows up as Homer of Canterbury, a court jester serving some unnamed king who, based on the clothing and architecture, is probably meant to be from the late medieval period, maybe 14th or 15th century, though the show never bothers to tell us which king specifically. Could be Edward III, could be Richard II, genuinely no idea. What we do know is that Homer of Canterbury's entire existence revolves around two things: making the king laugh and keeping his family from starving, which in medieval England were directly connected because if you failed at the first one, the second one became a lot harder. Homer of Canterbury performs slapstick routines that would make the Three Stooges look sophisticated. We're talking pratfalls, getting hit in the face with various medieval objects, crude jokes about bodily functions, the whole 9 yards. The king, who appears to have the sense of humour of a particularly dim 9-year-old, finds this absolutely hilarious. Homer's act includes juggling, which he's terrible at, tumbling, which results in actual injuries, and a recurring bit where he pretends to be a chicken for reasons that are never explained and frankly don't need to be. The physical comedy is genuinely dangerous because this is before worker safety regulations by about 600 years. So when Homer takes a fall, he's landing on stone floors, and when he gets hit with a prop, that prop is actual wood or metal. The pressure on Homer is constant because medieval kings had a habit of executing people who displeased them. And while the show plays this for laughs, there's a real undercurrent of terror to his situation. He's got a wife and kids, the medieval Simpson family living in what appears to be a small cottage on the castle grounds, or nearby in the village, and their entire livelihood depends on whether the king wakes up in a good mood. One episode shows Homer of Canterbury bombing during a performance, telling a joke that doesn't land, and the king's face goes completely cold. The whole court goes silent. Homer immediately launches into an even more degrading physical routine, essentially sacrificing his own dignity and safety to win back the king's favour. And it works, but you can see the calculation happening. It's his body in humiliation versus his family's survival, and it's not really a choice. The writers never specify what the rest of the Simpson family does during this period, but we see brief glimpses of them living a fairly standard medieval peasant existence, which means subsistence farming, periodic disease, and a general life expectancy that would horrify modern audiences. Homer of Canterbury is actually doing relatively well by medieval standards because he has consistent access to the castle, which means better food than most peasants. But he's also one bad performance away from total ruin, so the security is largely illusory. Then we get Marge's side of the family tree, and this is where things get significantly more interesting from a historical warfare perspective. Marge of Arc, and yes, the Joan of Arc reference is incredibly obvious, and the show is not trying to hide it, starts as a peasant woman in what appears to be rural France. Though again, specific dates are not the show's strong suit. She's living under a feudal lord who is, even by medieval standards, unreasonably cruel. We're talking excessive taxation, arbitrary punishment. The whole feudal oppression playbook turned up to about an 11. Marge of Arc has no initial interest in leading anything. She's trying to keep her head down, work her land, and survive, which was the goal of roughly 90% of medieval peasants. But the lord keeps pushing, demanding more grain, more labour, more everything, until the village is on the edge of actual starvation. The breaking point comes when the Lord's soldiers take food directly from a family with small children, and Marge watches this happen in the village square. Something shifts. She's described in the episode as having this look of absolute determination, and she starts talking to her neighbours. The initial organising happens quietly, in homes and fields, away from the Lord's eyes. Marge of Arc isn't giving grand speeches at this point. She's having practical conversations about what they have, what they need, and what they can realistically do. She's taking stock of how many able-bodied people they have, what weapons they can improvise, what the Lord's patrol patterns look like. This is tactical thinking, not revolutionary fervour, at least not at first. The fervour comes later, once people realise someone is actually taking their situation seriously and treating resistance as a solvable problem rather than a fantasy. The movement grows faster than anyone expects, including Marge of Arc herself. Word spreads to neighbouring villages that someone is organising, that there's a plan, that maybe they don't just have to accept this. Peasants start showing up, and we're talking dozens, then over 100, then more. They're armed with farm tools mostly, scythes and hammers and axes, things that can double as weapons if you're desperate enough. And they are absolutely desperate enough. Marge of Arc finds herself at the head of what is functionally a peasant army, which was not her plan when she started complaining about grain requisitions a few weeks earlier. The Lord, when he hears about this, makes the classic mistake of underestimating them. He sees peasants with farming equipment and assumes this will be a quick, brutal lesson in knowing your place. He sends a force of knights, actual trained warriors with real armour and real weapons, expecting to scatter the peasants in minutes. The two forces meet in an open field, and this is where Marge of Arc's strategic thinking becomes crucial. She knows they can't win a straight fight. Knights in armour against peasants with scythes is not a fair matchup, so she doesn't try to make it a fair fight. She uses the terrain, positioning her forces near a wooded area and a stream that creates muddy ground. When the knights charge, and knights always charge, because that's what they're trained to do, they hit the mud and slow down. The weight of their armour, normally an advantage, becomes a liability. Marge of Arc's forces swarm them, using numbers and desperation, and the fact that they know this land better than any knight. It's messy and chaotic, and people die on both sides, but when it's over, the knights retreat. The peasants actually win. The victory sends shockwaves through the region because peasant revolts weren't supposed to succeed, especially not against trained knights. Marge of Arc becomes a symbol basically overnight, which is both empowering and dangerous. She tries to use the momentum to establish something better, a system where the peasants have more say, where taxation is less crushing, where arbitrary violence isn't just accepted as normal. She's essentially trying to create a proto-democratic structure in a world that has no framework for that concept. And it goes about as well as you'd expect. Other lords in the region are watching this, and they're terrified because if it works here, it could spread. They start pushing back, not with direct military action yet, but with political pressure, economic isolation, threats. Marge of Arc is trying to hold together a coalition of villages that have never had to govern themselves, dealing with internal disputes about land and resources, managing food distribution for a population that's still recovering from the previous lord's exploitation. It's not glorious. It's administrative work and conflict resolution and trying to keep people fed, which turns out to be harder than winning a battle. A period of uneasy peace settles over the area. The peasants have their victory and their new system, fragile as it is. The lords haven't retaliated in force yet, but everyone knows it's coming. Marge of Arc is rebuilding, fortifying, training more people, preparing for the next fight while trying to prove that this new way can actually work. Centuries later, because time is a flat circle and also a very long line, we arrive at the Renaissance. This is where things get artistic, and by artistic, I mean profoundly weird. We find ourselves in Italy, sometime around the 15th or 16th century, give or take a few decades because historical precision isn't exactly the show's strong suit. Here, a new Simpson ancestor emerges, and honestly, the family tree at this point is less a tree and more a tangled, thorny bush that's been hit by lightning multiple times. This particular ancestor is a struggling artist, which, let's be real, is a deeply Simpsons-esque predicament. His name, or at least one of his names, is hinted at as Homerus da Vinci, which is just chef's kiss in terms of naming conventions. It immediately tells you everything you need to know. He's a Simpson, he's in the Renaissance, and he's probably not going to invent anything useful. Homerus, bless his heart, is grappling with poverty. He's living the quintessential, starving artist life, except instead of a garret, it's probably a slightly less drafty corner of a stable, and instead of existential angst, it's probably just hunger and a vague sense of confusion. He's pursuing his artistic passions with the kind of single-minded, yet utterly misguided determination that only a Simpson can possess. His artistic output is, shall we say, unconventional. While everyone else is painting serene Madonnas or meticulously rendered biblical scenes, Homerus is out here doing something else. His interpretations of classical subjects are often humorous, sometimes bordering on the absurd. Imagine the Mona Lisa, but she's got a slight smirk and is holding a half-eaten donut. Or the Last Supper, but everyone's arguing over who gets the last slice of pizza. It's not exactly what the patrons of the time were expecting, which probably explains the whole struggling artist part. He's painting a world that only makes sense to him, and possibly to a few future animators in the late 20th century. Homerus wasn't just a painter, though. Oh no, that would be too simple. He was a true Renaissance man, or at least he thought he was. He experimented with various art forms, because why stick to one when you can be equally mediocre at several? He dabbled in painting naturally, with his distinctively crude brushstrokes and questionable colour choices. He tried his hand at sculpture, likely resulting in lopsided busts that looked more like caricatures than classical figures. And then, because every Renaissance genius needs a side hustle, he delved into early forms of engineering. I genuinely have no idea what those early forms of engineering entailed for Homerus, but I'm picturing elaborate contraptions designed to, say, open a jar of pickles with maximum inefficiency, or a flying machine that could barely glide off a small hill before crashing into a pile of hay. The show doesn't give us specifics, which is both frustrating and entirely in character for how they handle these historical vignettes. We just know he tried. And in the Simpsons universe, trying is often more important than succeeding. Now this is where it gets truly fascinating, and also where the writers clearly had a field day. Homerus da Vinci is credited with the accidental invention of something called the Da Vinci Code. Yes, you heard that right. Not the Da Vinci Code, but the Da Vinci Code. It's a series of hidden, often nonsensical messages embedded within his artworks. Think of it as an early, extremely primitive form of Easter eggs, except the eggs are usually just Homer's catchphrases or crude drawings of food. For example, a painting of a noble knight might have chicken subtly etched into the background of a tapestry, or a landscape might feature a tiny, almost imperceptible woohoo hidden in the clouds. These weren't intentional puzzles for future generations to solve. They were just Homerus being Homerus, doodling his thoughts and feelings into his masterpieces. Naturally, these Da Vinci codes were initially dismissed as artistic quirks or, more often, outright mistakes by his contemporaries. Imagine a patron commissioning a grand fresco, only to discover a tiny, poorly drawn "Eat my shorts" scrawled beneath a depiction of a saint. They'd probably just assume the artist was either drunk, incompetent, or both. They wouldn't see it as a profound hidden message. They'd see it as a reason to haggle down the price, or perhaps demand a refund entirely. The idea that these were codes, let alone meaningful codes, was entirely lost on the Renaissance art critics, who were probably too busy debating the proper shade of cerulean to notice the subtle, existential dread in Homerus's work. Homerus, bless his cotton socks, struggled immensely to gain recognition for his innovative, yet often crude, artistic style. He was a man ahead of his time, or perhaps just a man completely out of sync with his time. His contemporaries, the established and traditional Renaissance artists, probably looked at his work and scoffed. Imagine Michelangelo meticulously chiselling David, looking over at Homerus trying to sculpt a perfectly spherical donut out of marble, and just shaking his head. He faced competition, obviously, from artists who actually knew how to draw a straight line or understand basic human anatomy, and he faced ridicule because nothing says Renaissance art critic like a good, solid mocking. He was probably the subject of many a snide remark in the Florentine taverns, his name synonymous with artistic ineptitude. Despite all these challenges and the constant threat of starvation, Homerus da Vinci continued to create. He was driven by an inexplicable urge to put his unique vision onto canvas, into clay, or onto whatever surface he could find. He left behind a legacy that was, for centuries, largely unappreciated. His works were probably relegated to dusty attics or used as makeshift tavern signs, but in them, nestled amongst the questionable anatomy and the bizarre colour choices, were his unique Da Vinci codes. These hidden messages, these little glimpses into the mind of a Simpson, would wait for centuries to be discovered, to be understood, to finally get the recognition they deserved. It's a testament to the enduring, if misguided, spirit of the Simpsons lineage. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of the Renaissance era for the Simpsons. We've seen them as cave dwellers, as ancient Egyptians, as medieval knights, and now as a struggling Renaissance artist. The sheer variety of historical roles they've played is genuinely staggering, and we're only just getting started on this ridiculous journey. What happened to all those Da Vinci codes? Did anyone ever actually crack them? Were they ever meant to be cracked? Or were they just the ramblings of a hungry artist? How did Homerus even afford his art supplies, given his apparent poverty? And why, for the love of all that is holy, did he insist on drawing donuts in every single piece? Next up, we'll dive into the colonial era, the Wild West, and perhaps even a brief stint in the Roaring Twenties. So we've covered the primordial ooze and the very first, Simpsons, if you will. Now we're actually going to jump forward several millennia, skipping over, the invention of fire and the wheel, and probably a few other things the writers just haven't gotten around to retroactively inserting into the family tree. We land squarely in the 17th century, a time of, pilgrims and witchcraft, and all sorts of things that feel very much like they were written specifically to give Marge a very specific historical costume to wear in a flashback. Our story, or at least the Simpsons version of it, truly begins in 1620, with a woman named Eliza Simpson. Yes, a Simpson, right there on the Mayflower. I know you probably thought the Simpsons were like a relatively modern phenomenon, maybe a few generations removed from a turn-of-the-century immigrant story. But no, they've been here since the very beginning. Eliza, bless her cotton socks, was one of the original passengers on that iconic voyage, which means she endured all the, shall we say, hardships of transatlantic travel in the 17th century. We're talking scurvy, cramped quarters, probably a surprising amount of communal singing, and the constant, nagging fear of falling off the edge of the flat earth. Because, science was still a work in progress back then. She made it, though, landing in what would become Plymouth, Massachusetts. And almost immediately, the Simpsons' luck started to kick in, which, as we'll see, is less luck and more unfortunate series of events, barely averted by sheer, dumb coincidence. See, Eliza eventually found her way to Springfield, Massachusetts. Not the Springfield, obviously, because that would be too easy, too straightforward. This is Springfield, Massachusetts, a historical place that exists. And because the writers enjoy tormenting the Simpsons across all historical eras, Eliza found herself accused of witchcraft. Now, in the 17th century, being accused of witchcraft was roughly equivalent to, being accused of anything really, except with the added bonus of being dunked in a pond or burned at the stake. It was a bad time for anyone with an independent thought or a slightly wonky garden. The historical record, as presented by the show, is a little fuzzy on the specifics of why Eliza was accused. Was it her penchant for a particularly potent brew of root beer? Her suspiciously well-behaved cat? Or perhaps she just had that classic Simpson, "I'm just trying to live my life. Why is everyone looking at me?" vibe that naturally attracts suspicion? We don't know. The show doesn't elaborate, which is both frustrating and, frankly, very on brand for how they handle historical details. It just happened. The accusation itself is canon, though, and it's a pretty significant moment, establishing a long-standing tradition of Simpsons being, shall we say, misunderstood by their local communities. The trial, we're told, was quite the spectacle. Imagine the Salem witch trials, but with more animated townspeople and probably a few more sight gags involving pitchforks. However, and this is where the Simpsons' luck almost works in their favour, Eliza was acquitted. Not because of any brilliant legal defence, mind you, or because the townspeople suddenly realised the error of their ways. No, she was acquitted on a technicality, a glorious bureaucratic 17th century technicality. The exact nature of this loophole is never fully explained, which again is peak Simpsons. Was it a misplaced comma in the indictment? A misspelled name? Did the judge simply misread the instructions? Did the prosecuting attorney accidentally prosecute himself? Your guess is as good as mine, and probably more entertaining. But the important thing is, Eliza walked free, narrowly avoiding a rather fiery end. This incident, by the way, sets a precedent for the Simpsons' uncanny ability to skirt disaster by the thinnest of margins, usually due to some absurd, unforeseen circumstance. It's almost like the universe itself can't quite commit to fully wiping them out. Anyway, while Eliza was busy narrowly avoiding immolation, another branch of the Simpson family tree, or rather a precursor to it, was making its own mark. We're talking about Abraham Simpson's ancestor. Yes, that Abraham Simpson, the one who tells rambling stories and falls asleep in inconvenient places. His ancestor was a Puritan, and not just any Puritan, but one of the really, truly earnest Puritans. The kind who probably thought smiling was a sin and believed that anything enjoyable was inherently evil. This ancestor, whose name is predictably not given, was instrumental in establishing a small settlement near what would eventually become the Springfield. Not Springfield, Massachusetts, but the Springfield we all know and love, the one with the nuclear power plant and the perpetually burning tire fire. This is a crucial distinction because it means the Simpsons have roots in both the historical Massachusetts and the fictional, ever-shifting, geographically ambiguous Springfield of the show. It's a neat little narrative trick that allows them to play with both real history and their own invented lore. This Puritan ancestor, driven by a desire for religious freedom, or at least freedom to practice his specific brand of religion and judge everyone else for theirs, carved out a little piece of wilderness. It wasn't easy, obviously. Colonial life was brutal. We're talking harsh winters, unfamiliar diseases, and the constant threat of, well, everything. And this brings us to another Simpson ancestor, possibly a farmer, who really struggled with these harsh conditions. I mean, imagine Homer trying to farm in the 17th century. It's not a pretty picture. This ancestor, let's call him Jedediah Simpson, probably woke up every morning to a field full of rocks, a barn full of disgruntled livestock, and a general sense of existential dread. The show depicts these struggles with a certain comedic flair, naturally, but it underscores the sheer grit and determination, or perhaps just stubbornness, that runs through the Simpson lineage. They might complain about it, they might do it poorly, but they do it. But it wasn't all just farming and narrowly escaping witch trials. Some Simpsons were, shall we say, more entrepreneurial. At some point, another Simpson ancestor got involved in the early colonial trade. This is where things get a little more interesting, because this trade, we're explicitly told, potentially involved Native American tribes. Now, the show doesn't delve into the complexities of colonial indigenous relations, which is probably for the best, given its comedic nature. But the implication is there. A Simpson was out there, haggling, bartering, probably trying to get a good deal on beaver pelts or something. This ancestor was likely a pragmatic sort, seeing an opportunity and taking it, regardless of the broader political or social landscape. It's a classic Simpson trait, that ability to focus on the immediate gain, sometimes to the detriment of everything else. It also hints at the diverse roles the Simpsons played in the early days of the colonies, not just as farmers or accused witches, but as active participants in the burgeoning economy. And speaking of community, another Simpson ancestor, probably around the same time, was helping to build the first church in the nascent Springfield settlement. This is a fascinating detail because it shows a different side of the family. Not everyone was a struggling farmer or a shady trader. Some were contributing to the civic and spiritual fabric of the community. This ancestor was probably hauling timber, mixing mortar, and generally doing the hard, thankless work of constructing a place of worship. It speaks to a certain sense of duty, a desire to be part of something larger, even if that something larger was a rather austere Puritan congregation. This is a thread that pops up occasionally in the Simpson family history, this unexpected streak of civic responsibility, usually when you least expect it. It's like for every Homer, there's a Marge, quietly making sure things don't completely fall apart. As the 17th century wore on, tensions between the colonists and Native American tribes escalated, culminating in King Philip's War, a brutal and devastating conflict that reshaped the landscape of New England. And you guessed it, a Simpson ancestor was present during this war. The show doesn't specify their role, whether they were a soldier, a settler caught in the crossfire, or perhaps just a very confused bystander, but they witnessed the local conflicts firsthand. This is a somber detail, a reminder that even in the comedic universe of The Simpsons, there are moments of genuine historical weight. This ancestor would have seen the destruction, the fear, and the violence that defined this period. It adds a layer of realism, however thin, to the family's history, grounding them in the actual events of the past. It's not all just slapstick and silly names. Sometimes it's about surviving a very real, very dangerous war. Then as we move into the 18th century, things start to get a little more revolutionary. And what better place for a Simpson to be during a revolution than in a tavern? That's right, a Simpson ancestor, a tavern owner, was serving drinks to early American patriots. Imagine this. Dimly lit room, the smell of stale beer and pipe smoke, hushed conversations about liberty and taxation without representation. And behind the bar, a Simpson, probably grumbling about the cost of ale or trying to shortchange a particularly verbose orator. This ancestor would have been privy to all the revolutionary fervour, the whispers of rebellion, the passionate speeches. They were, in a way, at the epicenter of the brewing revolution, not as a leader or a general, but as the person providing the liquid courage and the meeting place for those who were. It's a perfectly fitting role for a Simpson, observant, slightly cynical, and always looking for a way to make a buck, even if it means inadvertently aiding a historical movement. This tavern, by the way, would have been a hub of information, a place where news travelled, rumours spread, and revolutionary ideas took root, all facilitated by a Simpson who probably just wanted everyone to pay their tab. This is where we'll pause for now, as the rumblings of revolution grow louder, and the Simpsons, as always, find themselves right in the thick of it, which, is just wild. Anyway, so we've got these Simpsons, right, just sort of bumbling their way through the early colonial period, probably stepping on a lot of rakes and accidentally inventing new forms of slapstick comedy. But then things, as they often do, start to get a little revolutionary. And wouldn't you know it, a Simpson is right there in the thick of it. We're talking Boston Tea Party, folks. Not like a quiet observer, mind you. Oh no. We're told that a Simpson ancestor, whose name is lost to the annals of history, probably because he was too busy trying to juggle teacups, was directly involved. The canon implies this particular ancestor, let's call him Thaddeus, for lack of any better information, was perhaps a little too enthusiastic about the whole no taxation without representation thing. He wasn't just dumping tea, he was, as the legend goes, clumsily spilling it. Like, imagine someone trying to carry a tray of delicate porcelain and just sort of tripping over their own feet directly into Boston Harbor. That's our Thaddeus. He probably ended up face first in a barrel of Earl Grey, emerging with a monocle made of tea leaves and a profound sense of injustice, or at least a really bad headache. The historical accounts are a bit fuzzy on the specifics naturally, but the implication is clear. A Simpson was there, and a Simpson made a mess. A glorious patriotic mess, but a mess nonetheless. Now, while Thaddeus was busy making a splash, another Simpson was apparently making waves with words. We learn that yet another ancestor, a printer by trade, was churning out pamphlets. And these weren't your run-of-the-mill lost cat flyers, oh no. These were pamphlets critical of British rule. This is fascinating because it implies a level of literacy and political engagement that, frankly, I don't always associate with the Simpson lineage. But here we are. This printer Simpson, let's call him Bartholomew, because why not, was essentially the 18th century equivalent of an online provocateur, only with significantly more ink stains and a higher chance of being tarred and feathered. He was probably setting type by candlelight, grumbling about the Stamp Act, and occasionally misplacing a crucial vowel, leading to some truly bizarre and unintentionally hilarious revolutionary slogans. No taxation without representation, or something equally endearing. The impact of these pamphlets is, again, not explicitly detailed, but you can imagine Bartholomew proudly handing out his latest screed, only for half the villagers to use it as kindling. Still, it's the thought that counts, and the thought was, Britain, you're being a real jerk. Then we get to the big one, the heavy hitter, the ancestor who actually fought in the war. We're talking about Hiram Simpson. Now Hiram, we are told, is a direct ancestor of Homer. This is a crucial link, finally giving us a concrete name to attach to this revolutionary lineage. Hiram wasn't just a bystander, he was a participant in the American Revolutionary War. He was out there, muskets blazing, probably complaining about the lack of donuts. And get this, Hiram Simpson fought alongside George Washington himself, not just like in the same general vicinity, but at Valley Forge. Valley Forge, people. The winter of 1797-1778, the absolute nadir of the Continental Army's morale, the place where soldiers froze and starved. And Hiram Simpson was there. I can only imagine the conversations. General Washington, sir, could we perhaps get some warmer socks and maybe a pie? Washington probably just sighed and looked for a less whiny subordinate. But here's the kicker about Hiram. He was known for his bravery. Yes, bravery. A Simpson. In battle. This is where the lore starts to get truly perplexing, because while he was brave, he was also known for his love of napping during battle lulls. So picture this, a lull in the fighting, maybe a brief pause in the musket fire, and there's Hiram, curled up behind a rock, snoring gently, perhaps dreaming of a giant turkey leg. Then the fighting resumes, and Hiram, startled awake, springs into action, bravely charging forward, maybe even accidentally tripping over a cannonball, and somehow still coming out on top. It's the perfect Simpson blend of unexpected heroism and utter, unadulterated laziness. He probably had a special napping spot, carefully chosen for optimal sun exposure and minimal cannon fire. One can only assume his fellow soldiers just sort of accepted it, perhaps even using his snores as a sort of early warning system for enemy movements. Hear that? Hiram's dreaming of pork chops again. British must be close. While Hiram was bravely napping and fighting, another Simpson ancestor was contributing to the war effort in a slightly less direct, but no less vital way. We're told of a Simpson ancestor who was a blacksmith. This blacksmith was forging weapons for the Continental Army. This is a surprisingly practical and essential role for a Simpson. Honestly, you'd think they'd be more likely to accidentally forge a giant fork or a perpetually leaky bucket. But no, this ancestor, let's call him Hephaestus Simpson, was pounding out musket barrels and bayonets. He was probably covered in soot, perpetually squinting from the sparks, and occasionally hitting his thumb with a hammer, leading to a string of 18th century expletives that would make a sailor blush. The quality of these weapons is, naturally, not specified. Were they perfectly balanced, razor-sharp instruments of war? Or were they slightly lopsided, prone to jamming, and occasionally exploding in the user's face? Given the Simpson track record, I'm leaning towards the latter. But hey, they were weapons and they were forged, and that counts for something. Every little bit helped, even if that little bit was a musket that fired backwards sometimes. And then, just to round out the family's incredible involvement in the birth of a nation, we have a Simpson ancestor who actually witnessed the signing of the Declaration of Independence. This is a truly monumental moment, and a Simpson was there. I can see it now. This ancestor, let's call her Prudence, standing in the back of the room, fanning herself with a copy of Bartholomew's pamphlets, maybe occasionally nodding off, and then suddenly waking up with a start as John Hancock signs his name with a flourish. Oh, is it done already? Did I miss anything? Prudence probably spent the rest of her life telling anyone who would listen, and many who wouldn't, about the day she saw those important men put their names on that important paper. She might have even claimed to have suggested a particularly eloquent turn of phrase, or perhaps offered a crucial quill pen at just the right moment, despite having absolutely no involvement beyond being present. It's the Simpson way after all. Witness a historic event, then slightly embellish your role in it. After the war, with independence secured and the dust settling, the Simpsons didn't just pack up their musket and go home to nap. Oh no, a Simpson ancestor, still unnamed but clearly a civic-minded individual, helped to establish the first local government in Springfield. This is a crucial detail because it ties the family directly to the founding of their iconic hometown. Before this, Springfield was just, well, a collection of buildings, but with a Simpson involved, it started to become Springfield proud. This ancestor was probably the one pushing for things like town meetings and public works projects, like maybe a slightly less rickety bridge over the local creek, or a town square that wasn't perpetually muddy. They probably argued passionately about the placement of the town's first tavern, or the optimal number of stocks for public shaming. You can almost hear the exasperated sighs of the other townsfolk as this Simpson ancestor, full of grand ideas and questionable execution, tried to implement their vision of local governance. No, the town hall must have a rotating roof for optimal weather vane viewing. And finally, to cap off this incredibly busy period for the Simpson family tree, we have yet another ancestor, a surveyor, who was mapping out new territories for the expanding United States. This is a surprisingly adventurous role, honestly. This surveyor Simpson, let's call him Merriweather, was out there in the wilderness, probably with a compass that occasionally spun wildly out of control and a measuring chain that kept getting tangled in his legs. He was charting rivers, marking boundaries, and probably encountering a fair number of bears, all while trying to avoid accidentally declaring a new nation in the middle of nowhere. The maps he produced were probably a little impressionistic. Here be dragons, and also maybe a really good fishing spot. He was literally shaping the future of the country, one slightly inaccurate measurement at a time. It's a testament to the sheer, unadulterated, chaotic energy of the Simpson bloodline that they managed to be involved in virtually every significant moment of early American history, often in ways that were both profoundly impactful and utterly absurd. From clumsy tea spilling to brave napping, from pamphlet printing to land mapping, the Simpsons were there. And they were, as always, doing it their own unique way. So our story continues. We've just left the rather chaotic, if surprisingly well-documented colonial era, where the Simpsons were apparently everywhere and doing everything. Now, as the calendar pages flip forward into the 19th century, things somehow managed to get even weirder. I mean, you'd think after fighting in the Revolutionary War and then immediately getting involved in a bizarre cult, the family would just, settle down for a bit. Nope, not the Simpsons. The 19th century kicks off with a bang, or rather, a pan for gold. We find a Simpson ancestor, whose name is, frustratingly, not explicitly given, heading out to California during the gold rush. This is, of course, the mid-1800s, roughly 1848 to 1855, when everyone and their dog decided that striking it rich was just a pickaxe swing away. Now, you'd expect a Simpson to be terrible at this, right? Like they'd probably dig straight down to China or accidentally unearth some ancient, cursed artifact that turns everyone into sentient donuts. But no, the canon implies this ancestor was actually successful, or at least they were there. The details are, as usual, infuriatingly vague. We know they were a prospector, which means they were actively involved in the search for gold, enduring the harsh conditions, the back-breaking labour, and the constant threat of, other prospectors. It's a classic American tale, really, just with the added layer of Simpsonness, which means there was probably a comical misadventure involving a runaway mule or a gold nugget shaped suspiciously like Homer's head. I genuinely have no idea how they managed to not immediately lose all their gold in a poker game or invest it in a faulty snake oil scheme. It's a testament to the sheer, unadulterated luck, or perhaps the writers just didn't want to dwell on another Simpson failure, that this particular ancestor survived the gold rush with any semblance of dignity or gold intact. Then, because the Simpsons apparently have a penchant for being on every side of every major historical event, we pivot sharply to Eliza Simpson. Now, Eliza is a fascinating figure. She's a free black woman, which in itself is significant for the time period, and she's actively involved in the Underground Railroad. This places her squarely in the abolitionist movement, likely before or during the American Civil War, so we're looking at the decades leading up to the 1860s. The Underground Railroad, for those unfamiliar, wasn't an actual railroad, but a clandestine network of safe houses and routes used by enslaved African Americans to escape to free states and Canada. It was incredibly dangerous work, both for the escapees and for those who aided them. Eliza, being a conductor on this metaphorical railroad, would have risked everything: her freedom, her safety, her very life, to help others find theirs. We see her, in one of the historical flashbacks, guiding a group of enslaved people through the night, using coded signals and secret paths. It's a stark contrast to the gold-panning ancestor, showing the incredible diversity within the Simpson family tree. It also adds a layer of genuine heroism to the family's past, which, let's be honest, is often overshadowed by the sheer incompetence of its more modern members. It's a powerful moment, really, to see a Simpson ancestor engaged in such a profoundly moral and courageous act. And it makes you wonder, did she ever cross paths with other Simpsons? Did they know about her work? Did they help? Or were they just completely oblivious, off somewhere else, perhaps inventing a really bad prototype for a self-stirring spoon? The canon doesn't say, which is frankly a missed opportunity for some truly wild family reunion drama. Speaking of pioneering women, we then encounter Mabel Simpson. Mabel, bless her heart, was a suffragette. We're now moving further into the latter half of the 19th century and into the early 20th century, as the women's suffrage movement gained significant momentum, culminating in the 19th Amendment in 1920. Mabel was a fierce advocate for women's right to vote, participating in rallies, protests, and undoubtedly facing the societal scorn and ridicule that often accompanied such activism. Imagine a Simpson not just passively existing, but actively fighting for a cause, challenging the established order. It's almost inspiring. We see her in one of the historical vignettes, marching with a Votes for Women banner, her face determined. She's not just a background character in history, she's actively shaping it, demanding equality. And you just know, absolutely know, that somewhere in the background, another Simpson was probably complaining about how all this protesting was messing up their afternoon nap, or making it harder to get a good parking spot for their horse and buggy. But Mabel, she persevered. She represents a strand of resilience and social conscience that occasionally, almost accidentally, pops up in the Simpson lineage. It's a reminder that beneath all the donut eating and couch sitting, there's a deep, if often dormant, capacity for greatness in this family. And just when you thought the 19th century Simpsons couldn't get any more historically significant, we hit the American Civil War. This is where Abraham Simpson's great-grandfather, Virgil Simpson, enters the scene. Now this is a direct line to a main character, so the details here are a bit more fleshed out, which is a relief. Virgil Simpson, a Union soldier, fought for the North. This places him firmly in the mid-1860s, a pivotal and brutal period in American history. We see Virgil, young and idealistic, marching off to war, leaving behind a family that, one can only assume, was already causing him a good deal of stress. The war itself was, of course, a horrific meat grinder, and Virgil was no exception to its cruelties. He was captured by Confederate forces, a common fate for soldiers on both sides, and subsequently held in a Confederate prison camp. Now these camps were notoriously brutal. Conditions were appalling, with rampant disease, starvation, and inhumane treatment. Think Andersonville, but with a Simpson trying to complain about the quality of the gruel. It's a truly harrowing experience, and for a Simpson to endure, it speaks volumes about his fortitude. But Virgil, being a Simpson, and therefore possessing an almost supernatural ability to survive against all odds, usually through sheer dumb luck or the incompetence of his captors, didn't stay captured for long. He managed to escape the prison camp, and he did so with the help of a Union spy. This adds a whole layer of intrigue and espionage to the already dramatic narrative. Was the spy a professional operative, or was it just some random person who happened to be in the right place at the right time, perhaps disguised as a particularly unconvincing Confederate officer? The specifics are again a bit hazy, but the fact remains. Virgil Simpson, Union soldier, escaped a Confederate prison camp with the aid of a spy. Is the kind of story that would make for a fantastic, albeit probably very dark, animated special. Imagine the tension, the close calls, the narrow escapes, all with a distinct Simpson flavour of mild panic and accidental heroism. He likely didn't plan it, he probably stumbled into it, but he got out. That's the important part. After the war, Virgil Simpson returned home, but he was, understandably, a changed man. The experiences of war, and particularly the horrors of a prison camp, left an indelible mark on him. He was scarred, both physically and emotionally. This is a recurring theme with the Simpsons who experience warfare. It's never a clean, heroic affair. It's always messy, traumatic, and leaves lasting psychological wounds. It's a surprisingly nuanced portrayal for a cartoon, honestly. It shows that even the most absurd family can have a profound connection to real historical suffering. And you can almost picture him, sitting on his porch, staring blankly into the distance, while his immediate family, probably completely oblivious, argues about who gets the last piece of pie. The disconnect between his profound internal struggles and the mundane absurdity of his everyday life is, in a way, peak Simpson. As the 19th century drew to a close and the world hurtled towards the 20th, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and naturally, the Simpsons were right there in the thick of it. We see various ancestors working in factories, toiling away in the burgeoning industrial landscape. This means long hours, often dangerous conditions, and repetitive labour. It's a far cry from the gold prospecting or the abolitionist work, but it's another facet of the American experience that the Simpsons somehow managed to embody. You can imagine a Simpson ancestor on an assembly line, probably trying to unionize the place, or more likely, accidentally jamming the machinery with a misplaced sandwich. The sheer noise and grime of the factories would have been a stark contrast to the agrarian life many of them had known, and it's a testament to their adaptability, or perhaps just their desperation, that they found work in these new industrial behemoths. It's also a good bet that at least one of them was an early casualty of industrial accidents, probably involving a conveyor belt and a particularly stubborn pickle. Amidst all this industrialization, we also encounter Hiram Simpson, a farmer who struggled to make a living during an economic downturn. This would likely place him in the latter part of the 19th century, perhaps during one of the many panics or depressions that plagued the American economy. While some Simpsons were moving into factories, others were still tied to the land, facing the unpredictable whims of weather, market prices, and predatory lenders. Hiram's struggle highlights the economic precarity that many Americans faced during this period. It's not all progress and prosperity. For many, it was a constant battle for survival. And you just know, absolutely know, that Hiram's struggles were probably exacerbated by some truly terrible farming decisions, like trying to grow pineapples in Springfield's climate, or attempting to crossbreed a cow with a turnip. His plight serves as a stark reminder that even within the broad sweep of historical events, individual lives were often marked by hardship and uncertainty. And it's another notch on the ever-growing tally of Simpsons who had it rough, which at this point is starting to look less like a family tree and more like a deeply traumatized shrub. We'll pick up with the continued saga of the 19th century Simpsons shortly, because believe it or not, things are about to get even more complicated. And it's around this point, still very much in the 19th century, that Hiram Simpson, a direct ancestor we talked about earlier, finds his farm in dire straits. I mean, we're talking about the kind of financial peril that makes a modern-day mortgage crisis look like a minor inconvenience. His crops are failing, the market's bottomed out, and the bank, or whatever 19th century equivalent of a bank, was around to repossess your oxen, is breathing down his neck. Foreclosure is a very real, very imminent threat. It's not just a plot device, it's a genuine historical hardship that many farming families faced. Now, because the Simpsons, even way back then, understood the concept of all hands on deck when the ship was actively sinking, Hiram's wife, Honor Simpson, steps up in a big way. She realizes that Hiram's efforts alone, bless his cotton socks, aren't going to cut it. So Honor, with a spirit that honestly foreshadows Marge's own tireless dedication, takes on extra work. We don't get super specific details on what exactly she's doing, because the writers, in their infinite wisdom, decided that extra work was descriptive enough. but you can imagine it. Taking in laundry, sewing, maybe even some light blacksmithing if she was particularly ambitious. Whatever it was hard, grueling labour, all to try and keep the family farm from being swallowed whole by debt. It's a testament to the resilience that, frankly, every generation of Simpsons seems to inherit, whether they like it or not. And speaking of ambition, or perhaps misguided genius, it's during this chaotic period that another Simpson ancestor, whose name is unfortunately lost to the mists of time, or perhaps the writers just hadn't thought of it yet, decides that the solution to their earthly woes lies in the sky. This individual, with a pioneering spirit, and, I can only assume, a complete disregard for the laws of physics, invents a primitive flying machine. Now, I'm not talking about some hang glider or even a hot air balloon. This is described as a contraption of wood, canvas, and probably a whole lot of hope, designed to actually fly. Did it work? Of course not. This is a Simpson we're talking about. It was, by all accounts, a spectacular failure, probably ending in a comedic crash landing that somehow, miraculously, didn't result in any serious injuries. It's the kind of invention that makes you wonder if Homer's later attempts at entrepreneurship are less about bad luck and more about deeply ingrained ancestral traits. The spirit of innovation is there, but the execution, well, let's just say it leaves a lot to be desired. Meanwhile, on a completely different branch of the family tree, but still very much connected to the Simpsons, we have Cornelius Chapman. Yes, Chapman, not Simpson, but a distant relative nonetheless. Cornelius, unlike his farming and failed inventor kin, is a man of ambition and, for a time, success. He becomes a prominent politician. We're not told where he's prominent or what office he holds, but the implication is that he reaches a significant level of influence. Think state senator, maybe even a governor. He's the kind of relative the family probably bragged about at gatherings, the one who made something of himself. He probably wore a fancy hat and had opinions on everything. But, as is tradition with anyone connected to The Simpsons, even distantly, success is a fleeting mistress. Cornelius Chapman, in a move that I'm sure shocked absolutely no one in the family, becomes embroiled in a scandal. A scandal. Again, the specifics are deliciously vague, allowing our imaginations to run wild. Was it financial? Political corruption? A scandalous love affair involving a pie and a donkey? We don't know. What we do know is that it was significant enough to thoroughly tarnish the family name. It's the kind of scandal that gets whispered about for generations, the kind that makes distant relatives pretend they've never heard of a Chapman before. It's a classic case of the higher you climb, the harder you fall, and Cornelius Chapman apparently took a spectacular tumble, dragging a good chunk of the family's reputation down with him. So, while one branch of the family is dealing with political disgrace, another Simpson ancestor is out there, literally hitting the road. This individual becomes a travelling salesman, peddling various wares across the country. And when I say various wares, I mean various. We're talking elixirs that promise eternal youth, gadgets that probably did nothing, and maybe even some slightly used snake oil. This is the era of the charlatan and the huckster, and our Simpson ancestor fits right in, albeit probably an unsuccessful charlatan. They're out there crisscrossing the burgeoning American landscape, trying to make a buck, probably getting chased out of more towns than they made sales in. It's a life of constant movement, questionable ethics, and probably a lot of lonely nights. And it's another example of that classic Simpson tenacity, even if it's applied to slightly dubious endeavours. The 19th century, however, isn't all about failed inventions and political scandals. It's also about harsh realities. The family endures a particularly brutal winter. I mean, not just, oh, it's a bit chilly winter, but a full-blown, life-threatening, are we going to make it to spring? Kind of winter. Food shortages become a serious issue. Imagine trying to feed a large family when the ground is frozen solid and the stores are empty. It's a stark reminder of the precariousness of life before modern conveniences. And of course, with the cold and the lack of proper nutrition, illness sweeps through the family. We don't get details on who exactly falls ill, or if anyone perishes, but the implication is clear. This was a period of immense suffering and struggle. It's the kind of hardship that shapes generations, instilling a deep-seated appreciation for a warm meal and a sturdy roof over one's head. And then, because the Simpsons are nothing if not resilient, and frankly, a little restless, another ancestor decides that the solution to all these problems is to simply leave. This Simpson ancestor becomes a pioneer, packing up whatever meagre belongings they have and heading west. This is the great American expansion, the Manifest Destiny era, and our ancestor is right there, pushing the frontier. They're settling new land in the American West, probably building a log cabin with their bare hands, taming the wilderness, and generally doing all the things you see in those old Western movies, but with a distinct Simpsonian flair for mild incompetence. It's a monumental undertaking, a complete uprooting of life in search of opportunity, or perhaps just a desperate attempt to escape the aforementioned brutal winter and the lingering stench of political scandal. But pioneering life is not without its challenges, and this particular pioneer, Simpson Ancestor, has a tense encounter with Native American tribes. Now, the show handles this with a certain level of delicacy, shall we say. It's not a violent confrontation, but rather a standoff, a moment of cultural clash and misunderstanding. The details are fuzzy, as is often the case with these historical vignettes, but the general gist is that the pioneer is encroaching on tribal lands, and the tribes are, understandably, not thrilled about it. It's a moment that highlights the complex and often tragic history of westward expansion. Did our ancestor learn a valuable lesson? Did they manage to de-escalate the situation with a well-timed joke, or perhaps a poorly timed offering of snake oil? We're not explicitly told, but it's a significant event in the family's history, a brush with a reality far removed from their more settled ancestors. And it sets the stage for a lot of the later, slightly less dramatic, but equally absurd, events to come. So we've had Hiram's farm crisis, Honor's tireless work, a truly spectacular flying machine failure, Cornelius Chapman's political disgrace, the travelling salesman's questionable ethics, the brutal winter, and the pioneering spirit leading to a tense encounter. It's a lot, even for one century. And it really just goes to show you that the Simpsons, in all their forms, have been consistently finding themselves in utterly wild situations for a very, very long time. Next up, we're going to dive into the truly bizarre turn of the 20th century, where things, somehow, manage to get even weirder. We'll explore how the family navigates the Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, and 2 world wars, all while maintaining that distinct Simpsonian charm. We'll talk about the rise of Springfield as a major industrial hub, the origins of some of the town's most iconic landmarks, and a few more scandalous secrets that have been buried for decades. We'll also finally get to the bottom of how some of the more unique family traits started to manifest. And trust me, it's a journey. What about the earliest known quickie mart? How did Mr. Burns amass his initial fortune? And just how many times has a Simpson ancestor accidentally invented something revolutionary, only for it to be immediately forgotten? These are the questions that keep me up at night. For the next deep dive, I'm thinking either the sprawling lore of Adventure Time, the genuinely unsettling history of Courage, the Cowardly Dog, or perhaps the surprisingly intricate timeline of SpongeBob SquarePants? Let me know what you want to unravel next. Alright, so we've covered the very, very beginnings, the primordial ooze of the Simpsons universe, which, let's be honest, is mostly just a lot of question marks and a distinct lack of actual Simpsons. But now, finally, we get to some real, tangible, family history. We're talking early 20th century, folks, and this is where things start to get properly wild and, frankly, a little contradictory, because of course they do. Our story, or at least this chapter of it, kicks off with the birth of Abraham Grandpa Simpson. Now, the exact year is, as usual, a moving target depending on which writer was having a particularly vivid dream that week, but it generally places him in the early 1900s. We're talking somewhere around 1906, give or take a decade. He's old, is the point. Very, very old. So old, in fact, that his family, the original Simpsons, had to immigrate to the United States, from what's vaguely referred to as the Old Country. We never get a specific location, which is both convenient for the writers and incredibly frustrating for anyone trying to piece together a coherent family tree. Was it some forgotten corner of Europe? A land beyond the sea, perhaps? The show offers no definitive answers, leaving us to forever wonder about the ancestral homeland of the man who would one day yell at clouds. They just picked up and moved, like many families of that era, seeking a new life. And naturally, they ended up in Springfield. Because where else would they end up? It's not like there are other towns in this universe, really, unless it's a plot device. So little Abe, or at least a younger version of him, grew up in Springfield. We see glimpses of his childhood, which, true to form, are often framed through the lens of his increasingly unreliable memory. He talks about simpler times, about playing stickball and listening to radio serials, the kind of nostalgic, sepia-toned recollections that make you wonder if he's embellishing just a tad. But the underlying truth is he was a kid in the early 20th century, a period of immense change, and soon enough, immense hardship. Because as Abe was coming of age, the world decided to throw a curveball in the form of the Great Depression. This wasn't just some abstract historical event for Grandpa. It was a deeply personal, deeply impactful period. He faced genuine economic hardship. We see him recount stories of struggling to find work, of the sheer desperation that permeated the era. He wasn't born into wealth, that's for sure. The Simpsons, even then, were firmly in the working class, or perhaps struggling class, bracket. He had to hustle. He worked various odd jobs, anything to put food on the table, which, knowing Grandpa, probably involved a lot of questionable schemes and perhaps a few minor brushes with the law, though he'd never admit to the latter. We hear about him working in burlesque houses, as a carnival barker, even as a sort of proto-influencer for early consumer products, all of which paints a picture of a man constantly trying to stay afloat in a turbulent economic sea. It's a stark contrast to the relatively comfortable, if chaotic life his grandson Homer enjoys, and it really underscores the generational shift. He saw real struggle, real hunger, and it shaped him in ways that are often played for laughs, but have a genuine undercurrent of pathos. Then, of course, the world decided to get even more complicated. The Great Depression eventually gave way to an even greater global conflict. World War II. And like millions of other young men, Abraham Simpson answered the call. He enlisted in the US Army. Now this is where Grandpa's stories, already prone to exaggeration, truly enter the realm of legendary, self-aggrandizing tall tales. But beneath the layers of embellishment, there's a kernel of truth. He served. He was a soldier. He was part of the war effort, a fact he reminds everyone of, constantly, and usually at inappropriate times. He was assigned to a unit that would become infamous, or at least famous within the confines of Springfield's history, the Flying Hellfish. What a name, right? It sounds like something a 10-year-old would come up with for their G.I. Joe squad, and yet it was Grandpa's reality. This unit wasn't just a collection of random soldiers, it was a motley crew of Springfield's finest, or at least Springfield's available. We're talking about characters like Mr. Burns, who even then was a conniving, self-serving individual, and a young Seymour Skinner, though he was known by a different name then, and a few other colourful personalities who would later become prominent, or at least recognisable, figures in Springfield. They were, in Grandpa's telling, a brotherhood, bound by the horrors of war, and more importantly, by a shared secret. Because during their service, the Flying Hellfish stumbled upon something truly extraordinary, something that would define their post-war lives and become a source of both immense wealth and constant paranoia. They discovered a cache of stolen German paintings, not just any paintings, mind you, but priceless works of art, looted by the Nazis during their reign of terror. This wasn't some minor find, this was a treasure trove, the kind of thing that could set a person up for life. And, being soldiers in a war zone, with a distinct lack of proper chain of command or, frankly, moral oversight, they decided to keep it. This is where the infamous pact comes into play. The Flying Hellfish, recognising the immense value of their discovery, and perhaps fearing that if they turned it in, it would simply disappear into bureaucratic limbo, made a solemn agreement. They would hide the paintings, collectively, and then, after the war was over, after the dust had settled, and they had all returned home safe and sound, they would divide the spoils equally. This pact, forged in the crucible of war, would bind them together for decades, a secret society of sorts, with a shared claim to a fortune. It's the kind of story that sounds like it belongs in a pulpy adventure novel, but here it is, woven into the fabric of the Simpsons universe. It's also the kind of thing that, knowing the characters involved, was destined to go horribly, hilariously wrong at some point. But that, my friends, is a tale for a bit later. For now, just know that Grandpa, the old curmudgeon we all know and tolerate, was once a young man, fighting a war and sitting on a secret that would make him and his comrades incredibly rich if they could ever actually get their hands on it. And this truly is just the beginning of Grandpa's long, winding and often unbelievable journey through the 20th century. We've seen him as a child of the early 1900s, a survivor of the Great Depression, and a soldier in World War II, a member of a secret unit with a very valuable, very illicit secret. The sheer scope of his life, the historical events he's lived through, it's genuinely impressive, even if his retelling of them is usually accompanied by a healthy dose of dramatic flair and questionable accuracy. But the core facts remain. He was there, he saw it, and he helped shape the world, or at least his corner of Springfield, in ways that would reverberate for generations. We'll get to how that secret pact eventually plays out, and the lasting consequences it has on the Simpson family. Trust me, because it's a doozy. But for now, just picture young Abe, fresh from the battlefield, with a fortune waiting for him, and a lifetime of stories, both true and wildly exaggerated, ahead. Anyway, so while Abe was off doing whatever it is he did in the war, which again is a truly baffling question mark in the canon, he eventually finds himself at the Battle of the Bulge. Now this is a real battle, a major German offensive near the end of World War II, and it's depicted as being just absolutely brutal for Abe. We see flashbacks, and they are not pretty. He's in the thick of it, experiencing what can only be described as intense combat, the sheer chaos and violence of it all, the freezing conditions, the desperation. It's the kind of experience that would scar anyone, and it certainly leaves its mark on Grandpa. He's not exactly a picture of mental stability in his later years, And you have to wonder how much of that stems directly from the things he saw and did during this period. We're talking about a man who, despite his often comical senility, carries some seriously heavy baggage from his wartime service. He's seen things, man. Genuinely horrific things. Eventually the war ends, as wars tend to do, and Grandpa is honourably discharged from the military. He's a veteran, a decorated one, even if the decorations are sometimes questionable, or at least the stories surrounding them are. He comes back to a country that's booming, riding the wave of post-war prosperity. This is the era of economic growth, of new opportunities, of a general sense of optimism that probably felt a little jarring after the sheer, unadulterated misery of the war. People were buying houses, starting families, getting jobs, and Abe, like many returning servicemen, was trying to find his place in all of it. He attempts to settle into civilian life, which for a man who just spent years fighting in a war where the rules were, well, different, must have been a significant adjustment. The quiet hum of domesticity after the roar of battle, it's a transition that's easier said than done. And it's during this period, this post-war boom, that he meets and marries Mona Simpson. Now, Mona is a fascinating character, incredibly intelligent, principled, and frankly, far too good for Abe. Their courtship, as far as we can piece it together, is never fully detailed, which is a shame because you have to wonder what drew her to him. Was it his wartime heroism, perhaps exaggerated? His charm, which he occasionally still displays in flashes? Or was it just the prevailing societal pressure to settle down after the war? Whatever the reason, they tie the knot, and soon after, they have their son, Homer Simpson. Yes, that Homer Simpson, our Homer, the one we all know and, well, know. The timeline here gets a little squishy, as it always does with The Simpsons, but the general consensus is that Homer is born sometime in the mid to late 1950s, placing his parents' marriage squarely in that post-war era. Now, raising a family requires a steady income, and Grandpa, bless his heart, tries his hand at various jobs. We see him in flashbacks as a security guard, often in some truly bizarre and low-stakes scenarios. He's also, at one point, a burlesque house bouncer. Yes, you heard that right. Grandpa, the man who struggles to remember what he had for breakfast, was once responsible for keeping order in a burlesque club. The mental image alone is worth the price of admission. It speaks to a certain versatility, I suppose, but also to a consistent struggle to find stable, respectable employment. He's not exactly a career man, our Abe. He drifts from one thing to another, never quite settling, always a little bit out of sync with the world around him. And this, naturally, leads to friction with Mona. As I said, she's a woman of strong principles with a keen intellect and a desire for more out of life than what Abe seems capable of providing. Their disagreements aren't just about finances, though I'm sure that played a part. It's about fundamental differences in their worldviews, their ambitions, their very natures. Mona is restless, idealistic, and deeply concerned with social justice, while Abe is, well, Abe. He's set in his ways, a bit of a curmudgeon even then, and probably not the most understanding or supportive partner for someone like Mona. The cracks in their marriage begin to show, widening over time, until eventually Mona makes the monumental decision to leave. This isn't just a casual departure, it's a radical act for the time. She becomes a political activist, a counterculture figure, and goes underground after a run-in with the law during an anti-Mr. Burns protest. We'll get to the specifics of that later, trust me, because it's a whole saga in itself. But for now, the key takeaway is that she leaves Abe and a young Homer. This sudden absence, this void, profoundly impacts both of them. Abe is left to raise Homer as a single father for a period, which, given Abe's unique parenting style, probably wasn't the most stable environment for a developing child. Homer's often cited daddy issues, his deep-seated need for approval, his occasional emotional immaturity. All of it can be traced back, at least in part, to this period of his life. He's a kid who grows up with a father who's trying his best, but whose best is often just not quite good enough, and a mother who is a ghost, a legend, a whispered memory. It's a heavy burden for a child, and it shapes the man Homer becomes in profound ways. The weight of that absence, the unanswered questions, the longing for a mother he barely knew, it's all part of the Homer Simpson origin story. Okay, so we've got Grandpa, fresh from the war, trying to navigate civilian life, marrying Mona, having Homer, and then being left to pick up the pieces after Mona's dramatic exit. The emotional baggage here is just piling up, isn't it? And all of this is happening against the backdrop of a rapidly changing America, a country grappling with its own post-war identity, its own social upheavals. The Simpsons family, even in its earliest iterations, is a microcosm of these larger societal shifts, a reflection of the challenges and complexities of the American experience. They're not just a cartoon family, they're a lens through which we can view the evolving landscape of the 20th century. And we're still only in the early part of it, mind you. There's so much more chaos to come. The sheer number of times the show has contradicted its own established law regarding Grandpa's war service, his relationship with Mona, and Homer's childhood is truly staggering. It's like the writers have a dartboard with Grandpa's past written on it, and every time they need a new flashback, they just throw a dart, and whatever sticks, sticks. We've seen him in the trenches, as a USO entertainer, a bomber pilot, a POW, a member of the Flying Hellfish, a private, a general, a medic, a cook, a secret agent, and probably a few other things I'm forgetting. How does one man do all of that? Was he secretly a shapeshifter, a time traveller? Or perhaps, and this is just a wild theory, the writers just don't care about internal consistency when it comes to Grandpa's backstory. I lean towards the latter, but the shapeshifter theory is pretty compelling. Not gonna lie, it would explain so much. The man is a walking, talking historical anomaly, a living paradox wrapped in a moth-eaten blanket, and the Mona situation is equally convoluted. Was she always an activist? Did she become one after Homer was born? How long was she gone before Homer really started to notice? The show plays fast and loose with these details, leaving us, the diligent law keepers, to piece together a coherent narrative from a mosaic of often conflicting fragments. It's a puzzle with half the pieces missing and the other half from a different puzzle entirely. But we persist because that's what we do here. We try to make sense of the senseless, to find order in the chaos, to impose a logical structure on something that was clearly never intended to have one. It's a noble, if ultimately futile, endeavour. So, to recap this particular whirlwind of events, Grandpa fights in the Battle of the Bulge, gets honourably discharged, experiences the post-war boom, marries Mona, has Homer, tries various odd jobs, and then Mona leaves, leaving him to raise Homer alone. It's a lot, even by Simpsons standards, and it sets the stage for so much of what's to come, so many of the character dynamics and emotional beats that will define the show for decades. The foundations of the Simpson family, as dysfunctional as they are firmly laid in this period of shifting landscapes, personal struggles, and societal change. The echoes of these early years reverberate throughout their lives, shaping their choices, their relationships, and their often hilarious, often heartbreaking destinies. And we're about to dive headfirst into the next chapter of that saga, as Homer grows from a motherless child into Homer. What could possibly go wrong? Everything, probably. Everything will go wrong. So, after the Great Depression and the Second World War, after the whole Jazz Age thing, and all the societal upheaval that came with it, we finally arrive at the 1970s. This is where things start to get, well, personal for the Simpsons, because this is when Homer and Marge are growing up. And look, I'm just going to say it, the timeline here is a mess. A beautiful, glorious, deeply contradictory mess. We're talking about a show that's been on for decades, where the characters famously don't age, but their backstories are firmly rooted in specific decades. So we're going to try and untangle this as best we can, focusing on the events as they happened in universe, rather than the air date of the episode that revealed them. Just bear with me, okay? We'll get through it. Now, Homer J. Simpson and Marjorie Marge Bouvier, they're both growing up in Springfield, though not always in the same circles initially. Homer, as we know, is the son of Abraham Abe Simpson and Mona Simpson. And Mona, bless her subversive heart, is a fascinating character who really shapes Homer's early life, even in her absence. At some point in Homer's childhood, which we can firmly place in the late 60s or early 70s based on the flashbacks, Mona becomes a radical activist. She's part of a counterculture movement, a real firebrand, and she gets involved in some pretty serious anti-establishment activities. Her most notable act, the one that sends her underground, involves sabotaging Mr. Burns' germ warfare lab. Yes, that Mr. Burns. Apparently, even in his younger, slightly less cartoonishly evil days, he was dabbling in bioweapons. Mona and her fellow activists, including a character named Seth and another named Munchie, infiltrate the lab and destroy all of Burns' research. They use a giant antibiotic, a penicillin bomb, if you will, to neutralize the pathogens. It's a genuinely audacious act of eco-terrorism, or perhaps, depending on your perspective, heroic activism. The fallout, however, is immense. Burns, being Burns, doesn't just let this go. He hunts Mona down, and she's forced to go into hiding, leaving behind her young son Homer and her husband Abe. So young Homer is raised primarily by his father, Abraham Simpson. And this is where we start to see the roots of Homer's unique personality. Abe is, shall we say, not the most attentive or emotionally available father. He's a veteran, a bit of a grump, and prone to telling incredibly long, rambling, and often embellished stories. He does his best, I suppose, but Homer's childhood is marked by a certain lack of parental guidance, particularly from a maternal figure. This absence, this void left by Mona, undoubtedly contributes to Homer's later struggles with responsibility and emotional regulation. He spends a lot of his youth just kind of floating along, getting into various scrapes, and generally being a bit of a slacker. He's not malicious, just undirected, and honestly, who can blame him? His mum vanished after blowing up a germ lab. That's gotta mess with a kid. Meanwhile, Marge Bouvier is having a somewhat more conventional, though still distinctly Bouvier upbringing. Her family, the Bouvier, are a bit more buttoned down, more focused on appearances and social norms, even if those norms are often filtered through the perpetually unimpressed lens of her sisters, Patty and Selma. At some point during her youth, likely in her early teens, Marge attends a summer camp, and this is where she experiences her first real crush, a formative experience for anyone, but particularly for Marge, who is generally quite reserved. She develops a crush on a camp counselor, a charming guitar-playing older boy, who, naturally, doesn't really notice her beyond a superficial level. It's a classic unrequited love scenario, and it leaves an impression on Marge, a yearning for connection and romance that she carries with her. It's also a stark contrast to Homer's relatively chaotic childhood. Marge is seeking stability, affection, and a certain kind of domestic bliss even at a young age. Now we fast forward a bit, and Homer and Marge finally meet in high school. This is a pivotal moment, obviously. The specific year is, as always, a little fuzzy, but it's firmly in the 1970s. Homer is a senior, Marge is a junior. Homer is, predictably, not exactly a star student. He's more interested in goofing off and, let's be honest, probably thinking about food. Marge, on the other hand, is a diligent student, a bit shy, but with a strong moral compass and a surprising artistic streak. Their meeting is, well, it's classic Homer and Marge. Homer is smitten almost immediately, captivated by Marge's distinctive blue beehive hair and her kind nature. He's clumsy, he's awkward, he's completely unfiltered, but there's an undeniable charm to his persistence. He tries to impress Marge in various ways, most famously by joining the debate team. This is, in retrospect, hilarious because Homer Simpson and formal debate are like oil and water. He's terrible at it, naturally, but his motivation is pure. He wants to win Marge's affection, and Marge, despite herself, is touched by his efforts. She sees something in him, a genuine sweetness beneath the buffoonery. This burgeoning romance, however, is not met with universal approval. Marge's older twin sisters, Patty and Selma Bouvier, are, from the very beginning, staunchly opposed to Homer. They see him as a lout, a ne'er-do-well, someone completely unworthy of their sister. And to be fair, they have a point. Homer is, objectively, not the most eligible bachelor. He's loud, he's lazy, he's prone to bad decisions. But Marge, ever the optimist, sees past all of that. She sees his heart, his loyalty, and his capacity for love. Patty and Selma's disapproval becomes a running gag throughout the entire series, a constant source of friction, but it originates right here in their teenage years when they first witness Homer's clumsy attempts to court their sister. They are, shall we say, not convinced by his debate skills, or his general existence for that matter. Despite the Bouvier sisters' best efforts to sabotage their relationship, Homer and Marge continue to grow closer. They attend prom together, a classic high school milestone. This is another one of those moments where the show really leans into the specific aesthetics of the 70s, with the music, the fashion, and the general vibe. Homer, in his ill-fitting tuxedo, and Marge, looking radiant despite her sister's snide remarks, share a memorable night. It's a testament to their budding love, a clear indication that despite their differences, they are drawn to each other in a profound way. The prom solidifies their relationship, moving them beyond just a casual high school romance into something more serious, something with genuine potential. After high school, or perhaps during the summers between years, Homer and Marge spend some time working at a country club. This is another one of those slightly surreal experiences for Homer, who is definitely not cut out for the refined world of country clubs. He's probably a caddie or a groundskeeper, or something equally ill-suited to his temperament. Marge, ever the diligent worker, likely takes on a more respectable role, perhaps in the pro shop or as a waitress. It's another glimpse into their contrasting personalities and their different approaches to life. Homer is trying to make a quick buck, probably causing more trouble than he's worth, while Marge is focused on earning an honest living and saving for their future, even if that future is still a bit nebulous at this point. Around this same time, Homer also works at his father's miniature golf course. This is a classic Abe Simpson enterprise, probably not very successful, and likely run with a certain level of chaotic inefficiency. Homer's experience here is, again, probably more about goofing off and avoiding actual work than it is about learning any valuable skills. It further reinforces the idea that Homer's early career path is, shall we say, meandering. He's not driven by ambition or a clear sense of purpose. He's just kind of going with the flow, taking whatever odd jobs come his way, and generally trying to have a good time. This is a stark contrast to Marge's more focused approach to life, and it sets the stage for some of their later conflicts and challenges. As their relationship deepens, and they start to think about a future together, Homer realizes he needs a more stable job, something that can actually support a family. This is a significant turning point for Homer, a moment where he genuinely tries to step up and take responsibility. He attempts to get a job at the Springfield nuclear power plant. Now, the plant, even back then, is a bit of a local institution, a major employer, and a place that offers decent wages, if you can stomach the work, and the unique management style of Mr. Burns. Homer, however, is initially rejected from the power plant due to his lack of qualifications. This is not surprising, given his academic record and his general disinterest in anything that requires sustained mental effort. He doesn't have the necessary skills, the experience, or even, let's be honest, the basic common sense for a job at a nuclear facility. This rejection is a setback, but it also highlights Homer's developing sense of responsibility. He's trying, even if his efforts are clumsy and ultimately unsuccessful at this initial stage. He's trying for Marge. He's trying for the life they're starting to envision together. And that, in itself, is a pretty big deal for Homer Simpson. So they've got this whole apartment thing going on, which, is a step up from, whatever it was before. And it's not long at all before Marge finds out she's pregnant with Bart, which honestly you'd think would send Homer into a full-blown existential crisis, but he mostly just panics about money. Because of course he does. He's Homer. Now this is where things get a little fluid, shall we say, in the Homer employment department. Because for a guy who eventually lands a job for life, he really struggles to find anything stable to support his rapidly expanding family. We see him at one point briefly working at a gulp-and-blow fast food restaurant. And when I say briefly, I mean it in the most Homer Simpson sense of the word. It's a job that exists just long enough to illustrate how utterly unsuited he is for, most gainful employment that doesn't involve sitting in front of a console. He's flipping burgers, probably burning them, definitely eating some of them. It's a whole thing. The specific details of why he leaves or is fired are, as usual, conveniently glossed over, because the narrative needs him to be perpetually on the cusp of failure before he can accidentally succeed. It's a pattern, you'll notice, a very consistent, very Homer-shaped pattern. The pressure mounts, obviously. A baby is on the way, and Homer, bless his simple heart, starts thinking about the unthinkable, leaving Springfield. He genuinely considers it because he believes, in his own Homer way, that a change of scenery will magically conjure better opportunities. Because that's how the world works, right? You just pick up and go, and suddenly the job market's throwing lucrative positions at you. He's probably envisioning some idyllic, stress-free life in a town where the power plant doesn't exist, and therefore neither does the need for a safety inspector. The sheer optimism, or perhaps delusion, of it is almost admirable. He's not thinking about the emotional toll, the uprooting, the fact that Marge has her entire support system, however dysfunctional, in Springfield. He's just thinking, new town, new me, new job that pays money and doesn't require me to do much. It's a classic Homer solution, which is to say, it's no solution at all. But Marge, ever the pragmatist and frankly, the only adult in this relationship, for a good chunk of their early years, steps in. She encourages him, in her gentle but firm way, to pursue a job that will actually provide for their family. She's not asking for the moon, just stability. She's not saying, be a brain surgeon. She's saying, find something that pays the bills and doesn't involve you eating all the profits. She knows Homer, she knows his limitations, but she also knows his potential, however deeply buried it might be, under layers of sloth and donuts. She's the one who sees the good in him, even when he's actively trying to hide it under a mountain of bad decisions. And this is a pivotal moment, because without Marge's push, Homer probably would have just drifted from one terrible, low-paying, short-lived job to another, or worse, just moved back into his parents' basement, which honestly would have been a whole different show. So armed with Marge's encouragement, and probably a healthy dose of desperation, Homer does something uncharacteristically bold. He confronts Mr. Burns. Yes, that Mr. Burns. The same Mr. Burns who is basically the living embodiment of corporate greed and indifference. Homer, in a moment of pure, unadulterated fatherly instinct, marches into the power plant, presumably past security that is either non-existent or just utterly baffled by his audacity, and demands a job. He's not asking, he's demanding. It's a testament to how much he genuinely wants to provide for his family, because confronting Mr. Burns is not something you do lightly. It's like walking into a dragon's lair and asking for a raise. You just don't. Now, here's where the narrative takes a surprisingly heartwarming, if slightly contrived, turn. Mr. Burns, who we know to be a man utterly devoid of human emotion, is somehow moved by a letter from Marge. A letter, mind you, that she presumably wrote without Homer's knowledge, detailing their plight, their hopes, and probably emphasizing Homer's, unique qualities as a provider. The exact contents of this letter are, sadly, lost to the annals of cartoon history, but it must have been a masterpiece of emotional manipulation, or perhaps just a very well-worded plea from a desperate young woman. Whatever it said, it worked. Mr. Burns, in a rare moment of something resembling compassion, or perhaps just a momentary lapse in his usual villainy, hires Homer as a safety inspector. The irony, of course, is that Homer is perhaps the least safe individual to ever walk the earth, let alone inspect a nuclear power plant. But hey, a job's a job, and thus Homer's destiny, or at least his career path, is sealed. He is now officially employed at the Springfield nuclear power plant, a position he will hold with varying degrees of competence for the rest of his recorded life. With a stable, if entirely inappropriate, job secured, Homer and Marge take the next big leap. They buy their first house. And not just any house, they buy this house. 742 Evergreen Terrace, the iconic two-story, pinkish domicile that will serve as the backdrop for literally thousands of their misadventures. It's a fixer-upper, naturally, because they're young and broke, and Homer probably negotiated the price down by accidentally breaking something during the viewing. The details of the purchase are, again, a bit fuzzy, but the important thing is they're homeowners. They have a place to call their own, a place to raise their family, a place where Homer can spend countless hours on the couch. It's the quintessential American dream, even if their version of it involves a nuclear power plant and a perpetually stressed-out wife. And then the moment of truth. Bart Simpson is born, the firstborn, the little hell-raiser who will eventually drive Homer to drink, Marge to therapy, and Springfield to the brink of chaos on a semi-regular basis. His birth is, as you might expect, not entirely smooth. There are complications, there are Homeric antics, there are probably some deeply inappropriate jokes made by Dr. Hibbert. But he arrives, a spiky-haired bundle of mischief, ready to unleash his particular brand of anarchy upon the world. The exact date of his birth is, of course, a moving target depending on the episode. But in this chronological framework, he's the first, the trailblazer, the one who sets the stage for all the sibling rivalry and family dynamics to come. A few years later, because families tend to grow, Lisa Simpson is born, and she is, in every conceivable way, the polar opposite of Bart. She's intelligent, she's sensitive, she's a budding intellectual, and a moral compass in a family that desperately needs one. Her birth is probably a lot calmer, a lot more dignified, simply because Lisa herself is a lot calmer and more dignified. She brings a different kind of energy to the household, a more thoughtful, introspective vibe that often clashes with Homer's blissful ignorance and Bart's chaotic energy. She's the one who will eventually question everything, challenge every assumption, and generally make everyone around her feel slightly inadequate, but in the most well-meaning way possible. She's the conscience of the family, and her arrival signifies a shift in the family dynamic, from a simple two-parent, one-child unit to a more complex, intellectually diverse group. And finally, to complete the family unit, Maggie Simpson is born. The silent observer, the pacifier-sucking sage. She arrives presumably without much fanfare, and immediately establishes herself as the most observant and often the most intelligent member of the family, despite her inability to speak in full sentences. Her birth rounds out the iconic quintet, the 5 members of the Simpson family who will go on to define an entire era of television. She's the quiet force, the one who often saves the day without anyone even realizing it, the one who sees everything and says nothing. Her arrival marks the completion of the core family unit, the one we've come to know and love, or at least tolerate, for decades. So by the end of this period, roughly spanning the 1970s and 1980s, Homer and Marge have gone from awkward teenagers to a fully formed family of 5, living in their iconic home, with Homer inexplicably employed at the nuclear power plant. It's a journey filled with questionable decisions, moments of surprising tenderness, and a whole lot of economic anxiety, and it sets the stage for everything that comes next, which, as you can imagine, is a lot. A whole lot. We've gone from a single isolated incident of Homer being a general menace to society to a fully fleshed out, if still deeply dysfunctional, family unit. The sheer number of times Homer has managed to avoid serious consequences for his actions is at this point a running tally that's starting to get a little ridiculous. Let's just say the universe is incredibly forgiving to this man. What I still don't understand, and maybe I never will, is how Marge consistently manages to put up with all of this. Like, what is her secret? Is it just pure, unadulterated love? Or is there a deep-seated belief that she can somehow fix him? And what exactly was in that letter to Mr. Burns? Was it just a really good font? I genuinely have no idea. Next up, we'll be diving into the truly wild stuff that happens once the kids are actually, kids. The formative years of Bart, Lisa and Maggie, and how their individual personalities really start to blossom, or in Bart's case, explode. We'll also see how Homer manages to keep his job despite all evidence to the contrary, and how Marge continues to be the glue holding this entire chaotic enterprise together. It's going to get even weirder, trust me. For our next deep dive, we could explore the convoluted lore of SpongeBob SquarePants, the surprisingly dark origins of the Powerpuff Girls, or perhaps the truly bizarre timeline of Adventure Time. Let me know what you want to unravel next. Anyway, so we've established that the world of The Simpsons is, shall we say, a bit of a temporal anomaly. But even in a universe where the laws of physics and common sense are more suggestions than rules, there are still some foundational events that had to happen, and they happened mostly in the 1980s, which is a phrase that already feels like a lie when we're talking about characters who are perpetually trapped in a sort of early 2000s amber. But bear with me. So rewind the clock to 1974. Yes, 1974. This is when Homer and Marge, our foundational duo, first crossed paths at Springfield High School. Now you might be thinking, wait, Homer and Marge in high school in 74, that would make them like 60-something now. And to that I say, congratulations, you've stumbled upon the central paradox of The Simpsons. Don't think about it too hard, or your brain will turn into a pretzel, and not the good kind. The important thing is they met, Marge with her iconic blue beehive, which apparently was already a thing in high school, and Homer, who was, well, Homer. A bit of a slacker, prone to minor mishaps, but with a surprising knack for winning Marge over. It's a classic tale, really, if your definition of classic involves a surprising amount of accidental property damage and questionable fashion choices. Their initial interactions were, shall we say, less than romantic. Homer, in a desperate attempt to get Marge's attention, initially pretended to need tutoring in French, which honestly is a pretty bold move for someone who later struggles with basic English. Marge, ever the compassionate soul, agreed, only to discover his ruse. But even then there was something there, a spark, or maybe it was just the static electricity from Marge's hair. I genuinely have no idea. The canon is a little fuzzy on the exact atmospheric conditions of their first meeting, but it definitely involved a classroom and a burgeoning, if clumsy, attraction. Their relationship blossomed as much as a relationship between a perpetually exasperated Marge and a delightfully oblivious Homer can blossom. They went to their senior prom together, and this is where things get interesting, because like all good origin stories, it's not without its dramatic flair. Homer, in a fit of jealousy, or perhaps just general Homerness, ended up ripping Marge's prom dress. Now, most people would probably call that a deal-breaker. Marge, however, being Marge, saw past the sartorial disaster and recognised the underlying, if poorly expressed, affection. She forgave him. This, I think, is a crucial moment in understanding their dynamic. Marge's capacity for forgiveness and Homer's uncanny ability to mess up and still be loved are essentially the pillars of their marriage. It's a testament to Marge's incredible patience, or perhaps just a very low bar for acceptable prom behaviour. So they fell in love, or more accurately, they continued to fall in love. Because let's be honest, the prom incident was just another step on that very long, very winding road. They started dating in earnest, navigating the complexities of young adulthood in Springfield. Homer, bless his heart, wasn't exactly a catch in the traditional sense. He was still the same lovable oaf, prone to schemes that rarely worked out, and with a distinct lack of ambition. Marge, on the other hand, was intelligent, artistic, and possessed a moral compass that Homer frequently borrowed, only to return slightly bent. It's a classic opposites attract scenario, but with more hairspray and fewer brain cells than typical. Their dating life, as depicted in flashbacks, involved a lot of Homer trying to impress Marge with various ill-conceived stunts, and Marge sighing dramatically, but ultimately finding it endearing. It's a delicate balance, really, between exasperation and affection, and they seem to have mastered it. Then the bombshell. Marge discovered she was pregnant with Bart. Now, the exact circumstances leading up to this discovery are, predictably, a bit vague. It's the Simpsons, after all. They don't dwell on the birds and the bees, especially when those birds and bees are Homer and Marge. But the fact remains, Marge was pregnant. This was a significant turning point, obviously. It meant that their carefree, if somewhat chaotic, dating life was about to be irrevocably altered. And for Homer, it meant a sudden, stark confrontation with responsibility, a concept he was, at that point, only vaguely familiar with. The news of the pregnancy spurred them into action. Specifically, it spurred them into getting married. In 1980, Homer and Marge tied the knot at a seedy chapel. And when I say seedy, I mean seedy. We're talking a quickie wedding chapel, the kind of place where the officiant probably doubles as a pawn shop owner. It wasn't the fairy tale wedding Marge probably dreamed of, but it was their wedding. And it was, in its own way, perfectly Homer and Marge. It reflected the slightly rushed, slightly improvisational nature of their lives. The important thing, from a canonical perspective, is that they did get married. They made it official, cementing their status as the central couple of, well, everything. With a baby on the way and a marriage certificate in hand, Homer realized he needed a stable job. And by stable, I mean a job that paid enough to support a family, even if it involved working in a place that could irradiate you. So, Homer took a job at the Springfield nuclear power plant. This is another one of those foundational moments that reverberates throughout the entire series. Homer, as we know, is not exactly a paragon of occupational excellence. His work ethic is questionable, his attention span is microscopic, and his understanding of nuclear physics is, charitably, non-existent. Yet he got a job at the plant. Why? How? The show implies it was largely due to a lack of other options, and perhaps a very desperate Mr. Burns. But he got it. And this job, specifically as a safety inspector, is the source of endless jokes, plotlines, and probably a good chunk of Springfield's various environmental disasters. It's also, crucially, the reason why the Simpsons are able to maintain their perpetually middle-class, perpetually struggling existence. Without Homer's plant job, there's no house, no 3 kids, no endless supply of Duff beer. It's the linchpin of their economic stability, however tenuous that stability might be. Then Bart Simpson was born, also in 1980. This made Homer and Marge first-time parents. And, as anyone who has ever been a first-time parent knows, it's a whirlwind of sleepless nights, questionable advice, and a sudden realization that your life is no longer your own. For Homer and Marge, this was amplified by the fact that they were, well, Homer and Marge. Bart, even as a baby, had a mischievous glint in his eye. He was, from day one, a handful. The show frequently depicts their struggles during this period, the exhaustion, the financial strain, and the sheer bewilderment of trying to raise a tiny human. Homer, in particular, was not exactly a natural at fatherhood. He loved Bart, of course, but his methods were, shall we say, unconventional. Marge, as usual, bore the brunt of the emotional labour, trying to keep the family afloat, while Homer navigated the steep learning curve of being a dad. They struggled, as all new parents do. There were moments of pure joy, of course, but also moments of utter despair. Homer's attempts at childcare often ended in disaster, and Marge found herself constantly trying to mitigate the chaos. It's a realistic portrayal of early parenthood, just with more nuclear safety hazards and fewer actual consequences for Homer's antics. They learned on the fly, making mistakes, and somehow, through it all, managing to keep Bart alive and, dare I say, relatively well-adjusted for a cartoon character who never ages. And then, because one child is clearly not enough chaos for Homer and Marge, Marge became pregnant with their second child. Yes, another one, because apparently they hadn't learnt their lesson the first time around. Or perhaps they genuinely enjoyed the challenge. I mean, who am I to judge? But the fact remains, a second pregnancy was on the horizon, promising even more sleepless nights, more financial strain, and another tiny human to add to their already overflowing household. This, of course, sets the stage for the arrival of Lisa, who, as we'll see, brings an entirely different kind of challenge to the Simpson household. But that's a story for a different part of this very long, very convoluted timeline. So, Bart's barely out of diapers, and already, in 1982, the Simpson household is getting another addition, Lisa Simpson. Now, I don't know if Homer and Marge had a big family plan, or if this was just a happy accident, but suddenly there are 2 kids running around, or, one running and one mostly just observing, with an unsettlingly advanced gaze for a newborn. And, as anyone who's ever had to buy diapers for one child, let alone 2, can tell you, this immediately puts a strain on the family finances. Homer, bless his cotton socks, is trying his best, but 2 kids means more mouths to feed, more clothes to buy, and more general chaos to manage. This financial pressure, this constant low thrum of "we need more money," it actually becomes a recurring theme in Homer's life, a kind of existential dread that occasionally bubbles up into full-blown, ill-advised career changes. And one of those moments happens right around this time. Homer, feeling the weight of responsibility and probably a bit stifled by the rigid structure of the power plant, decides, you know what, I'm going to chase a dream. A dream of what, you ask? Well, that's the beauty of Homer. Sometimes the dream is fully formed, sometimes it's just not this. He briefly quits his job at the Springfield nuclear power plant. Yes, the place that provides the steady, if soul-crushing income. He walks away. Now, what he pursues exactly in this interim, the canon, is a little fuzzy on the specifics. Was it a short-order cook gig? A door-to-door salesman? A brief, ill-fated attempt at being a street performer? The exact nature of his dream pursuit is less important than the fact that it inevitably, and quite predictably, fails to pan out in a financially sustainable way. Because, it's Homer. He's a man of many talents, but long-term financial planning is not usually at the top of that list. So, after a period of what I can only imagine was increasing desperation and Marge's increasingly strained patience, Homer swallows his pride and returns to the power plant. Mr. Burns, ever the benevolent overlord, takes him back, probably because finding someone else willing to do Homer's specific brand of safety-optional work is harder than it looks. This whole cycle, the quitting, the struggling, the returning, it's a pattern that will repeat itself throughout his life, a testament to his eternal optimism and equally eternal lack of foresight. Now, you'd think after 2 kids and a brief financially ruinous career change, they might decide to, maybe take a breather. But no, because at some point, Marge becomes pregnant with their 3rd child. I genuinely have no idea what possessed them, what thought process led to this decision, or if it was just another one of those things that just happens in the Simpson household. Maybe they thought 3 would be the charm, or maybe they just really liked the idea of a full house. Whatever the reason, the news of another baby is certainly a development. The financial strain, which was already a palpable presence, is now going to be cranked up to 11. Homer, presumably, is back at the power plant, probably having just settled back into his routine, only to be hit with this news. You can almost hear the internal scream. And so, in 1985, completing the core family unit as we know it, Maggie Simpson is born. Another girl. So now, they have 2 girls and a boy. Maggie, from the moment she arrives, is, well, Maggie. She's largely silent, observant, and occasionally displays feats of strength and cunning that would make a seasoned spy blush. Her birth marks a significant milestone, solidifying the family of 5 that will become iconic. And with 3 children, the little house they were in, which was probably already bursting at the seams, is now officially a sardine can. Which brings us to 1986. With 3 kids and a growing need for space, the family makes a big move. They finally settle into their iconic 2-story pink-hued home at 7042 Evergreen Terrace. This isn't just a house, it's the house. It's where almost every single one of their adventures, their triumphs, and their absolute disasters will take place. It's the backdrop to their entire existence. I don't know the specifics of how they acquired it, if it was a good deal, or if it was just the only thing they could afford with Homer's power plant salary and 3 dependents. But they're in. They've got a yard, a garage, and enough rooms for everyone to at least pretend they have their own space. And almost immediately, Homer, in a moment of paternal enthusiasm, or perhaps just a desire to keep the kids occupied and out of his hair, installs a swing set in the backyard. A classic metal swing set, the kind that probably pinched fingers and rusted quickly, but nevertheless a symbol of childhood and outdoor play. It's a small detail, but it speaks to the burgeoning family life, the attempt to create a normal, happy environment for their rapidly expanding brood. Now, with everyone under one roof and a little more space to breathe, the individual personalities of the children start to really solidify and shine, much to the varying degrees of delight and exasperation of their parents. Bart, who's now a few years older, is really starting to come into his own as a mischievous force of nature. His pranks, his rebellious streak, his general disregard for authority, it's all blossoming. He's probably already skateboarding around the neighbourhood, pulling stunts, and generally making life interesting for anyone within a 5-block radius. He's the whirlwind, the chaos agent, the one who will constantly push boundaries and test limits. And then there's Lisa. Even at this young age, she's already showing early signs of her prodigious intelligence. She's curious, she's thoughtful, and she's probably already reading above her grade level, if she's even in school yet. But perhaps most notably, she's also displaying her nascent talent for the saxophone. I don't know where the saxophone came from, if it was a hand-me-down, a gift, or if she just gravitated towards it, but it becomes her instrument, her voice, her outlet for all the complex thoughts and emotions bubbling up inside her. It's a striking contrast to Bart's boisterous energy, a quiet, contemplative pursuit that sets her apart. So you have Bart, the unbridled id, and Lisa, the burgeoning superego, both developing under the watchful and often bewildered eyes of Homer and Marge. And Maggie, of course, is just silently observing it all, probably already formulating her own plans for world domination, one pacifier at a time. This period, from Lisa's birth to the family settling into Evergreen Terrace, and the children's personalities truly taking shape, it's the foundation. It's the moment the Simpsons become the Simpsons, a unit, a chaotic, loving, utterly unique unit, ready to face whatever Springfield and the world is about to throw at them. And trust me, it's going to throw a lot. So after all that, gestures vaguely at the preceding millennia of Simpsons lore, we finally get to the good stuff, or, well, the early stuff, which, depending on your tolerance for, let's call it, aesthetic experimentation, might or might not be good. But it's definitely stuff, and it all kicks off, believe it or not, in 1987. Yes, 1987, not 1989, not the year you probably think The Simpsons started. We're talking about the primordial ooze of yellow-skinned animation here. This is where the family, the entire family, makes their grand debut, not in their own show, because that would be too straightforward, wouldn't it? No, they popped up as animated shorts on something called The Tracy Ullman Show. Now, if you're under a certain age, you might be thinking, who is Tracy Ullman? And to that, I say, welcome to my world, kid. I genuinely have no idea how that show actually worked, or what it was even about, beyond being the unlikely incubator for the most famous animated family in history. The shorts were, and this is a deep cut produced by Klasky Tupo. If that name rings a bell, it's probably because they went on to do Rugrats and The Wild Thornberrys. So, a very specific animation house aesthetic. And the animation itself, well, it was handled by a trio of folks who had become pretty legendary in their own right. David Silverman, Wes Archer, and Rich Moore. These are the guys who, even with the incredibly limited budget and even more limited time, managed to give these characters their first wobbly steps. Now, the mastermind behind all of this, the guy who essentially willed these yellow people into existence, was Matt Groening. And in a move that's either incredibly sweet or incredibly lazy, depending on your perspective, he named pretty much all the main characters after his own family members. Homer, Marge, Maggie, Lisa. It's all Groening family canon. Bart, of course, is an anagram of brat, which is just chef's kiss. Perfect. No notes. This immediate personal connection, I think, is one of the foundational weirdnesses of the entire enterprise. It grounds the absurd in something deeply, almost uncomfortably, real, even when the animation looks like it was drawn by a particularly enthusiastic toddler with a crayon and a sugar rush. And speaking of that animation, let's not mince words here. It was crude. Like, really crude. We're talking early 8-bit video game cutscene crude. The characters are recognizable, but just barely. Homer's head is a giant lumpy potato. Marge's hair is a blue beehive that looks like it's perpetually about to tip over. Bart's spiky hair is less a series of distinct spikes and more a jagged yellow crown of thorns. And the shorts themselves, they mostly focused on incredibly simple domestic situations. No world-ending threats, no celebrity cameos, no elaborate musical numbers. Just, Homer trying to put Maggie to bed, or Bart being a little menace. The stakes were incredibly low, which in retrospect is probably why they worked. It allowed the characters' personalities to shine through, even when their faces were doing whatever that was. Homer, in these early incarnations, is already Homer. He's bumbling. He's well-meaning, in his own incredibly self-centered way. And he's almost constantly at odds with Bart. This is the core dynamic that, honestly, drives a huge chunk of the show even decades later. It's the classic father-son struggle, but filtered through Homer's unique brand of idiocy and Bart's equally unique brand of mischievousness. There's one short, I think it's called Good Night, where Homer tries to sing Maggie a lullaby, and it's just a disaster. He's off-key, he forgets the words, he eventually just gives up. It's pure, unadulterated Homer, before he even had a full-fledged catchphrase. It's the blueprint for every single bad decision he makes for the next 30-plus years. Marge, bless her cotton-picking heart, is already the long-suffering but incredibly loving mother. She's the voice of reason, the one trying to keep the family from completely devolving into utter chaos. Her patience, even in these early shorts, is legendary. You can see the seeds of her future exasperation, the quiet sighs, the subtle eye rolls, all there beneath the towering blue hair. She's the anchor, the one who, despite everything, genuinely loves her family, even when they're driving her absolutely bonkers. There's a short where she's trying to get the kids to clean up, and it's just a losing battle, but she keeps trying. Because that's Marge. She's the unsung hero of the entire operation, the one who holds it all together with sheer willpower and probably industrial strength hairspray. Bart, naturally, is established right out of the gate as the mischievous, rebellious son. He's the troublemaker, the one who's always pushing boundaries, always looking for a laugh, usually at someone else's expense. His catchphrase, "Eat my shorts," actually originates from these shorts. It's not quite as iconic as "Ay caramba" yet, but it's there, bubbling under the surface. He's the Ide of the family, the one who acts on impulse, consequences be damned. And it's brilliant, honestly. You have this perfect foil to Homer, someone who's equally prone to chaos, but for entirely different reasons. Homer's chaos is often accidental, a byproduct of his own dim-wittedness. Bart's chaos is deliberate, a carefully orchestrated symphony of mischief. Lisa, the middle child, is already showing signs of her intelligence and sensitivity. She's often overlooked, which, again, becomes a running theme throughout the show's history. She's the quiet observer, the one who's a little too smart for her own good, a little too aware of the absurdity around her. In one short, she's trying to get Bart to appreciate something, and he's just not having it. It's a subtle dynamic, but it's there, the beginnings of her role as the family's conscience, the one who actually thinks about things. She's the intellectual counterpoint to Bart's anarchy and Homer's. Well, Homer's everything. And then there's Maggie, the pacifier-sucking infant, the silent observer. Even in these early shorts, she's a scene stealer. She's not just a baby, she's a character. Her expressions, her subtle movements, her almost preternatural understanding of what's going on around her, all of it is there from the very beginning. She's the innocent bystander, but also, occasionally, the one who inadvertently saves the day, or at least provides a moment of unexpected wisdom. She's the wild card, the one who can do literally anything, and it will still make sense within the bizarre logic of the show. So, these shorts, these little animated vignettes, they're not just a historical curiosity. They're the foundational texts. They're the rough sketches that would eventually become the masterpiece. They establish the core personalities, the key dynamics, the very essence of what The Simpsons would become. They're a little rough around the edges, sure, but the heart, the humour, the sheer, unadulterated Simpsons-ness of it all is already there. It's like looking at a really early demo tape of a band that would go on to sell out stadiums. All the raw talent is there, just waiting to be unleashed. And unleash it they would. But not before a few more bumps and bruises along the way. Because as we'll see, the journey from crude short to cultural phenomenon is rarely a smooth one. Anyway, so these shorts, they're not just like little animated skits. They're effectively the primordial soup of the entire Simpsons universe. This is where we first see the iconic and frankly structurally questionable house at 742 Evergreen Terrace. I mean, it's a perfectly normal suburban home, except for the fact that it's been the site of, at least 3 alien invasions, 2 separate instances of spontaneous combustion, and one time Homer tried to launch himself into space from the backyard. But in 1987, it's just a house. A house where, in one of the early shorts aptly titled Good Night, we get a peek into the family's bedtime rituals. And by rituals, I mean Homer and Marge attempting to put their children to sleep with varying degrees of success, mostly failure. It's a surprisingly sweet, if slightly unsettling look at the family dynamic, establishing early on that these aren't your typical wholesome cartoon kids. Bart's a little devil, Lisa's too smart for her own good, and Maggie's just kind of there, observing the chaos with her pacifier. The shorts almost always end with a humorous or, more often than not, a slightly unsettling punchline. It's a signature groaning touch, that blend of the mundane and the absurd, often leaning into the cynical. Like you think it's going to be a sweet moment. And then Bart says something that makes you question the very fabric of society. It's brilliant. Now, if you go back and watch these things, which I highly recommend for a good laugh and a deep dive into animation history, you'll notice the animation style itself is in a constant state of flux. It's not just rough, it's evolving. Over the course of these shorts, the art style becomes noticeably more refined. The characters start to look less like something drawn on a napkin during a particularly intense fever dream, and more like the recognizable, if still a bit wonky, versions we'd see in the first season. It's fascinating to watch in real time, this artistic journey, from raw concept to something approaching a polished product. You can practically see the animators figuring things out as they go, experimenting with character design, facial expressions, and even how they move. It's a testament to the iterative process of animation, really. And it's during this period, these brief, minute-long glimpses into their lives, that key character traits and catchphrases begin to emerge. Bart, for instance, starts dropping his iconic "Eat my shorts" line. It's not just a random phrase either. It's perfectly indicative of his rebellious, slightly obnoxious, but ultimately lovable personality. It's a declaration of defiance, a childish taunt, and a preview of the cultural phenomenon he would become. These little verbal tics, these catchphrases, they're not just throwaway lines, they're foundational elements that would define these characters for decades. Homer's dough is still a few years off, but you can feel the nascent grumpiness, the simmering frustration that would eventually boil over into that perfect guttural expression of mild annoyance. Crucially, these shorts are also where we hear the early versions of the voices, performed by the legendary cast who would go on to define these characters for generations. Dan Castellaneta as Homer, Julie Kavner as Marge, Nancy Cartwright as Bart, and Yeardley Smith as Lisa. I genuinely have no idea how they managed to nail these voices so perfectly right out of the gate, especially considering how different the characters looked visually. It's like they instinctively understood the essence of these people, even in their crudest animated forms. You hear Bart's voice in those early shorts, and it's undeniably Bart, even if he looks like he's been drawn by a particularly enthusiastic 5-year-old. It's a testament to their talent, honestly, that they could imbue so much personality into such rudimentary animation. They were literally creating the voices of a cultural touchstone from scratch. Now, the thing about these shorts is they weren't just like a cute little side project. They gained popularity, a lot of popularity. People were tuning into the Tracy Ullman Show specifically to see these weird, yellow, dysfunctional cartoons. This unexpected success, this burgeoning fan base, is what ultimately leads to the development of a full standalone series. You see, the original idea wasn't necessarily to spin them off into their own show. They were just interstitial segments, a quirky little addition to a variety show. But the audience response was undeniable. So producers James L. Brooks, Matt Groening, and Sam Simon, seeing the writing on the wall, or rather the crude animation on the screen, began the process of developing The Simpsons as a standalone show. This wasn't a small undertaking. It meant expanding the universe, creating more characters, developing richer storylines, and most importantly, figuring out how to make a full 22-minute episode of these chaotic individuals. It was a gamble, a big one, especially considering the animation style was still so unconventional for network television at the time. The success of the shorts on the Tracy Ullman Show directly leads to a Christmas special, Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, which aired in December 1989. This special is technically the first full-length episode, and it's absolutely brilliant, laying the groundwork for everything that would follow, and then, almost immediately after, a regular series order from Fox. It's a truly meteoric rise from minute-long segments to a primetime network show. It's a testament to the raw, unpolished genius that Groening and his team managed to capture in those early shorts. They tapped into something universal, something relatable, even with the bizarre yellow skin and the 4 fingers. They created a family that, despite all their quirks and dysfunctions, felt real. And that, I think, is the true magic of The Simpsons from its very inception. So we've got the shorts, we've got the Christmas special, and then we're off to the races with the regular series. But before we get too deep into the series proper, there are a few other, shall we say, anomalies that crop up in the early lore that are worth exploring. Like, what about the time Homer was a professional boxer, or the weird early designs of some of the background characters? And what was up with that one episode where Maggie could talk? I mean, really talk, not just make pacifier noises. We'll get to all that, trust me. Next up, we need to talk about the truly bizarre, truly inexplicable phenomenon of Springfield's geography. It changes every other episode, I swear. Is it in Oregon? Is it in Kentucky? Is it in a state that doesn't exist? And how does it manage to have a desert, a mountain range, a coastline, and a nuclear power plant all within a 10-mile radius? I have genuine no idea. It's truly baffling. So what other franchises have truly baffling, inconsistent geography that makes absolutely no sense? And which ones have a surprisingly detailed, internally consistent lore that you'd never expect? Let me know. And for the next video, I'm thinking we could dive into the timeline of either SpongeBob SquarePants, Adventure Time, or maybe Rick and Morty. Alright, so we just left off with the shorts, those little animated vignettes that were basically the primordial ooze of what we now know. And then, at some point, the universe itself decided, you know what, these yellow people, they need more screen time. So in 1989, the full glorious half-hour series, simply titled The Simpsons, premiered on Fox. And this, my friends, is where things get, well, simultaneously more defined and infinitely more confusing. Because suddenly, all those little character quirks and nascent relationships from the shorts were solidified, given a home, and then immediately set on a trajectory to contradict themselves for the next 3 decades. It's a marvel, truly. The show immediately established Homer Simpson, our beloved patriarch, as a safety inspector at the Springfield nuclear power plant. Now, if you've ever actually seen the plant or Homer's approach to safety, you'll understand why this is perhaps the single greatest ongoing joke in the entire series. His job, in theory, is to prevent meltdowns and ensure compliance with regulations. In practice, it involves napping, eating donuts, and occasionally causing minor ecological disasters. He's got a console full of buttons, most of which he doesn't understand, and a general philosophy that if he ignores a problem long enough, it'll either go away or someone else will fix it. The sheer number of times Springfield has narrowly avoided catastrophe due to Homer's incompetence, or conversely, been saved despite Homer's incompetence, is frankly astounding. He's the guy who, upon seeing a flashing red light and hearing an alarm, will probably just hit it with a wrench, or eat it. Then we have Marge Simpson, who is consistently portrayed as the devoted homemaker, the steadfast, towering blue beehive of reason in a household that otherwise operates on pure ide. She's the one who tries to keep the family grounded, who attempts to instill some semblance of manners or morality, usually to little effect. Marge is the emotional core, the one who worries, who cleans, who cooks, and who, with an almost supernatural patience, tolerates Homer's endless parade of schemes and idiocy. Her voice, a comforting, slightly gravelly murmur, is often the last bastion of sanity, before everything inevitably devolves into chaos. She's the one who'll tell Homer not to buy a cannon, knowing full well he's already halfway to the cannon store. And then she'll clean up the cannonball-sized hole in the wall. The sheer number of times she's almost left Homer only to be pulled back by some bizarre, fleeting moment of sentimentality or, more often, a profound sense of duty could fill its own documentary. She's the glue, and frankly, it's a miracle that glue has held for so long. Bart Simpson, the mischievous 10-year-old, arrived fully formed as the quintessential enfant terrible. He's the one who popularized catchphrases like, "Eat my shorts," and "Don't have a cow, man." He's the rebellious spirit, the prankster, the skateboard-riding, slingshot-wielding agent of chaos. Bart's primary goal in life seems to be pushing boundaries, annoying authority figures, and generally having a good time, usually at someone else's expense. His relationship with Homer is a constant push and pull of affection and exasperation, often punctuated by Homer's signature strangling gesture. Bart's antics at school, his elaborate pranks on Principal Skinner, and his general disdain for anything remotely resembling responsibility are foundational elements of the show. He's the kid who'll graffiti a statue, then blame the dog, then try to sell the dog. And he'll probably get away with it. More often than not, his heart is in the right place, buried deep under layers of mischief and a healthy disrespect for the rules. Lisa Simpson, the 8-year-old middle child, is depicted as the intelligent, morally conscious, and often misunderstood voice of reason. She's the intellectual, the environmentalist, the vegetarian, the jazz saxophonist, and the general conscience of the family. Lisa is constantly striving for knowledge, for justice, and for a world that makes more sense than the one she lives in. She's often the one pointing out the flaws in Springfield society, the hypocrisy of its leaders, and the general absurdity of her family's behaviour. Her intelligence often isolates her, making her feel like an outsider, even within her own home. She's the one who will write a scathing editorial about the town's recycling program, then watch as her father uses the newspaper as a napkin. Her struggles with fitting in, with being heard, and with finding others who share her passions are a recurring theme. She's the kind of kid who'd rather read a book on quantum physics than watch a monster truck rally, and in Springfield, that makes her an anomaly. And then there's Maggie Simpson, the infant of the family, a character who communicates primarily through pacifier sucking and occasional, incredibly well-timed and often plot-driving words. Maggie is the silent observer, the one who sees everything and, despite her age, often understands more than anyone gives her credit for. She's surprisingly resourceful, capable of things no normal infant should be able to do, from operating firearms to rescuing her father from precarious situations. Her pacifier is almost an extension of her personality, a constant presence that signifies her quiet contemplation. Every now and then, she'll utter a single word, usually something profound or unexpected that hints at a hidden depth. She's the ultimate dark horse, the character you least expect to be the hero, but who often saves the day with a well-placed object or a surprisingly deft maneuver. The fact that she's been an infant for over 3 decades is a testament to the show's unique relationship with time, or lack thereof. The family, as we all know, lives in the fictional town of Springfield. Now, this is where the writers really leaned into the generic American city trope, to the point where there are literally dozens of Springfields in the United States, making it impossible to pin down its exact location. It's a town that manages to be simultaneously ordinary and utterly bizarre, a melting pot of eccentric characters, corrupt officials, and improbable events. Springfield has everything: a nuclear power plant, a quickie mart, a school that's barely functional, a tavern, a monorail that probably shouldn't exist, and a perpetually burning tire fire. It's a town where the mayor is a known embezzler, the police chief is a bumbling idiot, and the local news anchor is a self-obsessed narcissist. And yet, despite all its flaws, there's a strange charm to Springfield, a sense of community, however dysfunctional. It's the kind of place where an alien invasion is just another Tuesday. Moe's Sheslack's Tavern, affectionately known as Moe's, quickly became a frequent hangout for Homer and his friends. This dimly lit, perpetually sticky establishment is the heart of Springfield's adult social scene, or at least Homer's social scene. It's where Homer, Barney Gumble, Lenny Leonard, and Carl Carlson gather to drink Duff beer, complain about their lives, and occasionally get into bar fights. Moe himself is a perpetually grumpy, often cynical, and surprisingly sentimental bartender, whose life seems to be a constant struggle against loneliness and bad luck. Barney, the town drunk, is a fixture on the bar stool, his burps legendary. Lenny and Carl, 2 of Homer's co-workers from the plant, are a pair of mild-mannered, somewhat interchangeable friends who provide background noise and occasional, surprisingly insightful comments. Moe's isn't just a bar, it's a confessional, a sanctuary, and occasionally a front for illegal activities. The number of times that bar has been renovated, burned down, or turned into something else, only to revert to its original dingy glory, is a testament to its enduring, if grimy, appeal. Meanwhile, over at Springfield Elementary School, Principal Seymour Skinner struggles valiantly, and usually unsuccessfully, to maintain order. Skinner, a Vietnam War veteran with a perpetually strained relationship with his overbearing mother, is the embodiment of bureaucratic futility. He's a man who genuinely wants to do good, to educate the children, and to keep the school running smoothly, but he's constantly thwarted by budget cuts, incompetent staff, and, most notably, Bart Simpson. Bart is Skinner's personal nemesis, the thorn in his side, the constant source of his professional and personal misery. Their dynamic is a classic cat-and-mouse game, with Bart usually the cat and Skinner the increasingly frazzled mouse. Skinner's earnest attempts at discipline and education are almost always undermined by Bart's pranks, his indifference, or sheer dumb luck. The school itself is a testament to underfunding and neglect, a place where the lunch lady is a horror show and the teachers are barely hanging on. And yet somehow, learning still occasionally happens. Apu Nahasa P. Mapetalon, the proprietor of the Quickie Mart, was also introduced, solidifying his role as the perpetually overworked, surprisingly philosophical convenience store owner. Apu, an immigrant with multiple PhDs, runs the Quickie Mart with an almost religious devotion, often working absurdly long hours. His store is a staple of Springfield life, a place where you can get anything from a squishy to a lottery ticket, and occasionally a hot dog that's been on the roller for several days. The Quickie Mart is frequently robbed by Snake Jailbird, Springfield's resident petty criminal, a running gag that highlights both Apu's resilience and the general lawlessness of the town. Apu's life is a constant juggle between his demanding job, his large family, and his attempts to integrate into American culture while maintaining his own traditions. He's a character who embodies the immigrant experience, often with a humorous yet poignant touch. The number of times he's been held up at gunpoint, only to calmly offer the robber a complimentary squishy, is a testament to his unflappable nature. And then, of course, we have the true power behind Springfield, the wealthy and tyrannical Mr. Burns. Charles Montgomery Burns, the ancient, decrepit, and utterly ruthless owner of the nuclear power plant, is the personification of corporate greed and unchecked power. He's a man who has lived for so long that he remembers actual historical events and whose moral compass is so broken it barely registers. Mr. Burns often schemes to increase his already vast fortune, usually at the expense of his employees, the environment, or the entire town of Springfield. He's the kind of villain who would block out the sun just to save on electricity bills. His catchphrase, "Excellent," delivered with a sinister, finger-tenting gesture, perfectly encapsulates his gleeful malevolence. He's a character who is both terrifying and pathetic, a relic of a bygone era who clings to power with a bony iron grip. The sheer number of times he's tried to kill Homer, or at least severely maim him, is a running tally that only grows. And right by his side, always, is Wayland Smithers Jr., Mr. Burns' loyal and utterly sycophantic executive assistant. Smithers is the ultimate enabler, the man who caters to Burns' every whim, no matter how depraved or ridiculous. He's fiercely devoted to his boss, to the point of having a not-so-secret, unrequited crush on him. Smithers is the one who handles Burns' schedule, manages his finances, and generally keeps the ancient magnate from accidentally destroying himself or the plant. He's the voice of reason that Burns almost never listens to, the one who will gently suggest a less evil alternative, only to be immediately shot down. Smithers is a tragicomic figure, a man whose entire life revolves around serving a man who barely acknowledges his existence as a human being. The sheer amount of bizarre, dangerous, or ethically dubious tasks Smithers has performed for Burns could fill a small library. He's the one who will polish Burns' skeleton, if asked, and probably do it with a smile. This truly is the bedrock of the series, the foundation upon which all subsequent absurdity is built, and frankly, it's a miracle it all holds together. And honestly, it's a testament to the sheer, unadulterated chaos that is Springfield, that anyone can live there, let alone Ned Flanders, who, bless his heart, tries to be the most good-natured, overly pious next-door neighbour anyone could ask for. He's Homer's foil, his mirror, his eternal tormentors in the most wholesome way possible. Ned is just good. Like aggressively, almost offensively good. He's a widower, a father to Rod and Todd, and a devout Christian who genuinely tries to live by the tenets of his faith, which naturally puts him at direct odds with Homer's ID-driven existence. Homer, of course, is constantly borrowing Ned's stuff, breaking his stuff, using his stuff for nefarious purposes, or just generally making Ned's life a low-key hell. And Ned, being Ned, usually just sighs and offers to lend Homer something else. It's a dynamic that has fueled countless plots, from Homer stealing Ned's RV to Ned accidentally becoming a surprisingly successful entrepreneur with his Leftorium store, a shop exclusively for left-handed people. Because Springfield, you see, has an inexplicably large left-handed population, which is just one of those details that makes you go, sure, why not? Anyway, these adventures, these bizarre, often heartwarming, sometimes deeply cynical escapades of the Simpsons family in Springfield, they didn't just stay in Springfield. Oh no, they became a cultural phenomenon, a global touchstone. You couldn't escape them. The show was everywhere, on lunchboxes, t-shirts, video games, theme park rides. It permeated the zeitgeist to an extent that few other pieces of media ever have. It wasn't just a cartoon anymore. It was a lens through which to view American life, albeit a highly distorted funhouse mirror version of it. And part of that phenomenon, a huge part, was the sheer parade of recurring guest stars and celebrity voices. I mean, it's genuinely staggering how many famous people have lent their voices to this show, often playing themselves, sometimes playing entirely new, bizarre characters. We're talking everyone from Michael Jackson, who for legal reasons was credited as John J. Smith for his role as Leon Kompowski, a large white man who believes he is Michael Jackson, because of course that's a plotline, to Dustin Hoffman, credited as Sam Ettick for his role as Lisa's substitute teacher, Mr. Bergstrom. Elizabeth Taylor voiced Maggie's first word, which was Daddy. George Harrison, Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, all the surviving Beatles appeared. Stephen Hawking, Leonard Nimoy, Buzz Aldrin, Mark Hamill, James Earl Jones, Meryl Streep, Glenn Close, Alec Baldwin, Kim Basinger, Lucy Lawless, Dolly Parton, Elon Musk, Lady Gaga, Ricky Gervais, and even former Prime Minister Tony Blair. The list is genuinely endless. They'd often show up as exaggerated versions of themselves, or as one-off characters who would then, inevitably, disappear into the ether of Springfield's rotating cast of thousands. It's a testament to the show's cultural cachet that these A-listers were lining up to be on it, even if it meant being immortalised as a one-dimensional cartoon character for a single episode. This celebrity-laden approach also dovetailed perfectly with the show's penchant for parody. The series frequently, and I mean frequently, parodied popular culture. Movies, television shows, political figures, historical events, social trends, you name it, The Simpsons probably skewered it. From classic films like Citizen Kane, reimagined as Rosebud, with Mr. Burns and his beloved teddy bear Bobo, and The Shining, in a Treehouse of Horror segment, naturally, to entire genres like spy thrillers, sci-fi epics, and even reality TV, nothing was safe. They'd often do entire episodes that were direct homages or outright parodies of specific works, sometimes even down to shot-for-shot recreations of iconic scenes, but with that distinct Simpsons twist of absurdity and social commentary. Political figures were fair game too, with presidents, governors, and local politicians all getting the Simpsons treatment, usually depicted as either bumbling idiots, corrupt schemers, or both. It was a cultural mirror, albeit a very, very funny and often unflattering one. And speaking of cultural impact, let's talk about Homer's catchphrase, "Dough." It's not just a sound, it's an institution. That single exasperated grunt, usually uttered after Homer realizes he's made a colossal mistake or been outsmarted by a small child, became so widely recognized that it was officially added to the Oxford English Dictionary in 2001. Think about that for a second. A cartoon character's nonsensical exclamation is now a legitimate word in one of the most respected English dictionaries. It's defined as expressing frustration at the realization that one has said or done something foolish or stupid. And it's just perfect. It encapsulates Homer, and frankly, a lot of human experience in one succinct, guttural sound. That's the power of this show. Throughout all this, the show never shied away from exploring themes that resonated with its audience. Family, obviously, is at its core. The often dysfunctional yet undeniably loving bond between Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa and Maggie is the bedrock of the entire series. But beyond that, it delved into societal issues, pop culture's pervasive influence, consumerism, environmentalism, education, religion, politics, you name it. It managed to be both deeply silly and surprisingly poignant, often within the same episode. Lisa, in particular, became the show's moral compass, often championing environmental causes, vegetarianism. She became a vegetarian in the episode Lisa the Vegetarian in 1995, a groundbreaking move for a cartoon character at the time, and social justice. She's the intellectual, the activist, the one who sees the flaws in Springfield and tries, often fruitlessly, to make things better. Her struggles reflect real-world issues, from pollution and corporate greed to educational underfunding and gender inequality. She's the voice of reason in a town that frequently ignores reason, and her earnest efforts to improve the world, even when they're met with apathy or outright ridicule, make her one of the most compelling characters. Bart, on the other hand, is the id incarnate. His rebellious nature, an endless stream of pranks are a constant source of comical and sometimes chaotic situations. From his iconic catchphrases like, "Eat my shorts," and "Ay caramba," to his perpetual mischief at school and around town, Bart embodies the spirit of youthful rebellion. He's not malicious, not truly, but he's impulsive, easily bored, and always looking for a thrill. His pranks range from simple skateboard stunts to elaborate schemes that often backfire spectacularly, usually involving Homer. He's the kid every parent secretly fears and every kid secretly admires, a perfect balance to Lisa's idealism. And then there are the holiday specials. Oh, the holiday specials. Beyond the regular episodes, the family experiences various annual traditions, most notably the Treehouse of Horror Halloween episodes. These are a special breed of Simpsons episode, where the usual rules of reality and canon are completely thrown out the window. Characters can die, come back as zombies, turn into monsters, travel through time, or just generally experience utterly bizarre, often terrifying, but always hilarious scenarios. They're typically structured as 3 short segments, often parodies of classic horror films, sci-fi stories, or urban legends. They're a fan favourite, a chance for the writers and animators to really let loose and get away with things they couldn't possibly do in a regular episode. There are also Christmas episodes, Thanksgiving episodes, and even Valentine's Day episodes, each offering a unique spin on the holiday season through the Simpsons lens. Unsurprisingly, with all this groundbreaking humour, social commentary, and sheer cultural omnipresence, the series has won numerous awards. We're talking dozens of Emmy Awards, Peabody Awards, Annie Awards, and countless others. For its writing, its animation, its voice acting, its music, its everything. It's a critical darling as much as it is a commercial juggernaut, a rare feat for any television show, let alone an animated one. The sheer volume of accolades is almost as staggering as the number of guest stars. And then in 2007, after nearly 2 decades on television, the Simpsons movie was released. This was a monumental event, a feature-length film marking the franchise's first theatrical outing, and it was a huge success. It followed Homer's latest blunder, which results in Springfield being encased in a giant dome by the EPA, essentially making it a quarantine zone, and the family's subsequent escape and efforts to save their hometown. It was a bigger, grander version of a typical Simpsons episode, with higher stakes, more elaborate animation, and a budget to match. It proved that even after all those years, there was still plenty of gas in the tank, and that audiences were more than willing to pay to see their favourite yellow family on the big screen. The series, astonishingly, has continued to run for decades. It just keeps going. It became the longest-running American animated series, surpassing even The Flintstones, and then the longest-running American sitcom, passing Ozzie and Harriet. It's a television institution, a cultural artifact that has outlasted countless other shows, trends, and even entire generations of viewers. It's been on the air so long that some of its original viewers now have kids or even grandkids who are watching it. It's a testament to the enduring appeal of these characters, the timelessness of its humour, and the incredible talent of the people who bring Springfield to life. It's a show that has, against all odds, managed to evolve, adapt, and remain relevant for an unprecedented amount of time. A true titan of television. So, after all this, we're left with a few lingering questions. How does Springfield consistently rebuild itself after being utterly destroyed, sometimes multiple times in a single episode? What is the true nature of the space-time continuum in this universe, given the constant chronological inconsistencies and the agelessness of its characters? Will Maggie ever speak a full sentence? How many times can Mr. Burns possibly be almost killed? And will the show ever actually end? For our next deep dive into the obscure lore, we could tackle the baffling chronology of The Legend of Zelda, the surprisingly dark origins of SpongeBob SquarePants, or perhaps the truly convoluted multiverse of Kingdom Hearts. So we've gone from a primordial soup of yellow goo that somehow coalesced into a sentient, albeit deeply dysfunctional family unit, then watched them stumble through a baffling array of alternate realities, cosmic interventions, and the occasional, surprisingly tender moment, all while maintaining a baffling temporal stasis that defies every known law of physics and narrative progression. And that is the complete The Simpsons timeline.